History is a tapestry woven with threads so strange and unbelievable that they often feel more like fiction than fact. We think we know the story of the past, the rise and fall of empires, the great battles, the brilliant minds, but hidden within the grand narrative are moments so bizarre, so utterly baffling, that they defy simple explanation. These events linger at the edges of our understanding, whispering secrets that challenge everything we assume about reality itself. Today, we're embarking on a journey deep into the heart of the medieval world, an era cloaked in shadow and superstition, where the line between the possible and the impossible was often blurred beyond recognition. As we step back into the Middle Ages, we enter a time when the world felt both vast and mysterious, where maps were dotted with dragons and the unknown lurked just beyond the horizon. It was an age of faith and fear, of profound devotion and chilling uncertainty. Within this rich and complex backdrop, events unfolded that still leave historians scratching their heads. Vanishing villages, unexplained celestial phenomena, curses that seemingly spanned generations, and encounters with beings that defied all natural explanation. These aren't just dry footnotes in a textbook. They are pulsating, living mysteries that have endured for centuries, inviting us to question, to wonder, and to imagine what might truly be possible. In this video, we'll explore 30 of the most bizarre events from medieval history, each one stranger than the last. From the dancing plague that seized an entire town in a feverish, uncontrollable rhythm to the Green Children of Woolpit who emerged from the earth speaking an unknown language, these stories are more than mere curiosities. They are windows into the human experience in a world where mystery was part of daily life. You'll find yourself questioning what you thought you knew about history, reality, and perhaps even the nature of truth itself. So settle in, open your mind, and join me as we unravel tales so incredible you'll have to keep reminding yourself they really happened. Our journey begins in the sweltering summer of 1518 in the city of Strasbourg, a place gripped by famine, disease, and profound social anxiety. It was here on a hot July day that a woman named Frau Trophia stepped into the street and began to dance. This wasn't a dance of joy or celebration. It was a frantic, compulsive, and utterly uncontrolled motion. She danced for hours, then for days, her body moving with a desperate energy she could not command to stop. Within a week, the strange compulsion had spread to dozens more. Within a month, the streets were filled with over 400 people, all caught in the same terrifying, ceaseless frenzy. They danced until their feet were raw and bloody, until they collapsed from sheer exhaustion, or in some tragic cases, until they danced themselves to death from heart attacks or strokes. For weeks, the city echoed with the macabre rhythm of this unexplained mania, a spectacle of suffering that defied all reason. The authorities, desperate for a solution, made a fateful and disastrous decision. Following an old folk belief that the only cure for such a dancing mania was to dance it out, they actually built stages, hired musicians, and brought in professional dancers to keep the afflicted moving, believing this would break the fever. This, of course, only exacerbated the crisis, pouring fuel on the psychological fire. To understand why this happened, we must look at the world these people inhabited. Strasbourg was reeling from a series of crop failures, skyrocketing bread prices, and outbreaks of smallpox and syphilis. The population lived in a state of constant fear and religious fervor, where many believed such afflictions were a punishment from God or the work of demonic forces, specifically Saint Vitus, who was believed to curse people with a dancing mania. So what caused this bizarre event? Modern scientists and historians have proposed several theories. One of the most prominent is mass psychogenic illness, a form of mass hysteria where extreme psychological stress manifests as physical symptoms in a group. In a community already on the brink, the sight of one person dancing could have triggered a powerful sympathetic response in others, a collective breakdown under the weight of shared suffering. Another compelling theory points to ergot poisoning, Ergot is a fungus that grows on damp rye, a staple grain of the time. When ingested, it can cause convulsions, spasms, hallucinations, and a sensation of burning skin, symptoms that could be interpreted as an uncontrollable urge to move. It's the same fungus from which LSD would later be derived. While the psychological explanation feels most complete, the ergot theory offers a tantalizing physical trigger for one of history's most surreal and tragic chapters. While the streets of Strasbourg echoed with a desperate, rhythmic frenzy, a different kind of mystery was unfolding across the Channel in England, one not of mass hysteria but of profound and utter isolation. Several centuries earlier, in the midst of the reign of King Stephen during the 12th century, a most peculiar event was recorded in the Suffolk village of Woolpit. The name itself, meaning pit for trapping wolves, sets a scene of a rural community on the edge of a wild and untamed landscape. It was here, according to chroniclers Ralph of Coggeshall and William of Newburgh, that harvesters working the fields made a discovery that would become one of history's most enduring enigmas. They stumbled upon two children, a brother and sister, cowering and terrified at the mouth of one of the wolf pits that dotted the area. Their appearance was shocking enough to stop anyone in their tracks. Their skin was tinged with a strange, vivid green hue, a color unlike any known earthly complexion. The clothes they wore were fashioned from a material unfamiliar to the villagers, a strange fabric and an unusual cut. But the true depth of the mystery revealed itself when the frightened children were approached. They spoke in a language no one could recognize or even place a tongue of guttural, alien sounds that conveyed nothing but their obvious fear and confusion. The villagers, a mixture of baffled and compassionate, brought the children back to the home of the local landowner, Sir Richard de Calne. They offered them food, but the children refused all of it, seemingly repulsed by the offerings of bread and meat. They appeared to be on the brink of starvation until someone brought in a harvest of freshly cut beanstalks. It was only the raw, green beans that the children consented to eat, devouring them with a desperate urgency. For a time, this was their sole sustenance. Gradually, as they adapted to their new environment, their diet expanded to other foods, and as it did, the strange green pigment of their skin began to fade, eventually leaving them with a normal, healthy complexion. The boy, younger and seemingly more frail, grew increasingly despondent. He eventually fell ill and died, never having fully adapted to his new life. His sister, however, thrived. She learned English, was baptized into the Christian faith, and was eventually employed as a servant in Sir Richard's household. Once she was fluent enough to communicate her own story, she provided an account of her origins that only deepened the mystery. She explained that she and her brother came from a land she called St. Martin's Land, a place where the sun never rose and the light was perpetual, like the dim glow of twilight. All the people there, she said, were green like they had been. She described a world separated from this one by a wide, roaring river, and she recalled that they had been tending their father's flocks when they heard a tremendous, deafening sound. The next thing they remembered was waking up in the wolf pit in Woolpit, bathed in the blinding, harsh light of our sun. So how do we explain the Green Children of Woolpit? Historians have put forward several compelling theories. One of the most grounded suggests they were Flemish immigrants or orphans. During this period, Flemish weavers and merchants had settled in England, but they also faced violent persecution. King Henry II had indeed expelled many Flemish mercenaries from the region around this time. It's plausible that these children were survivors of such a conflict, perhaps hiding in the dense forests for so long that they suffered from chloroses, a form of anemia caused by malnutrition that can give the skin a pale, greenish pallor. Their unknown language could have been Flemish, which would have sounded completely foreign to the rural English villagers, and their story of a twilight land could be a child's confused memory of a dark forest or underground hiding place, with the loud noise being the sounds of the battle that orphaned them. Another theory leans into the realm of folklore, suggesting the tale is a morality story or an allegory. The green color could symbolize death and the afterlife, with the children representing souls crossing from a pagan underworld into the Christian one, their salvation coming through baptism and adopting a new faith and diet. Yet the story's persistence in two separate, relatively trustworthy chronicles lends it an air of credibility that pure myth often lacks. And then, of course, there is the most speculative theory of all, that the children were not of this world. In a modern context, their story reads like a classic account of an extraterrestrial encounter. The green skin, the unusual clothing, the unfamiliar language, the sudden arrival, and the description of a world with a different sun. While this is the least likely explanation from a historical standpoint, it speaks to the power of the mystery that it can still inspire such imaginative speculation centuries later. The girl assimilated, married a man from King's Lynn, and reportedly lived a long, normal life, leaving behind a story that remains a beautiful, unsolved riddle at the heart of the medieval world. From the verdant mystery of Woolpit's children, we now turn to a puzzle made of vellum and ink, an artifact so baffling that it has resisted every attempt at understanding for over 5 centuries. Tucked away in the Voynich Rare Book and Manuscript Library at Yale University is a book unlike any other on Earth, the Voynich Manuscript. This is not a typical medieval tome. Its 240 pages are a riot of the bizarre, filled from edge to edge with illustrations of plants that have never grown on this planet, intricate diagrams of celestial systems that bear no relation to known astronomy, and countless drawings of tiny, naked women bathing in what appears to be a system of interconnected green pools and tubes. And all of it is accompanied by a text written in an elegant, flowing, and completely unknown script. The script itself is the heart of the mystery. It consists of strange, curling characters that seem to be arranged into words and sentences, following patterns that suggest a real, structured language. Yet, not a single word of it has ever been convincingly translated. It has defied the world's greatest cryptographers, from elite codebreakers at both world wars to modern supercomputers running complex linguistic algorithms. They have all tried and they have all failed. This book is a lock without a key, a message that has stubbornly kept its secret since its first confirmed appearance in the court of Rudolph II of Bohemia in the late 16th century, where it was purchased for a king's ransom of 600 gold ducats. Where did it come from? The most popular theory attributes its creation to a 15th century English alchemist and dealer in rare books named Wilfrid Voynich, who rediscovered the manuscript in a Jesuit college in Italy in 1912 and brought it to public light, lending it his name. But carbon dating has since confirmed the vellum pages were created between 1404 and 1430, placing its origin firmly in the early Renaissance. Some have speculated it was the work of the eccentric genius Roger Bacon, though this has been largely disproven by the dating. Others have proposed it was a clever hoax by its first known owner, the alchemist and mystic Georg Bersch, designed to deceive Rudolph, a monarch known for his fascination with the occult. Yet the sheer volume of the text, the consistency of the script, and the complexity of the illustrations suggest an immense amount of labor for what would have been a pointless fraud with no clear payoff. The content only deepens the enigma. The manuscript is generally divided into sections based on its illustrations. The herbal section depicts fantastical flora with roots like tentacles and leaves unlike any botanical guide. The astronomical section features circular diagrams with suns, moons, and stars in unrecognizable formations. The biological section, perhaps the strangest, shows those nude figures in their green baths, connected by tubes and capsules in a way that some have interpreted as a bizarre allegory for human reproduction or an early, alchemical understanding of the circulatory system. Then there is the pharmaceutical section with drawings of isolated plant parts and apothecary jars. Every page is a fresh confusion, so what is it? The theories are as wild and varied as the drawings themselves. Some believe it is a lost language, perhaps a constructed script for a vernacular that never gained widespread use. Others argue it is an extremely complex cipher designed to protect alchemical or herbal secrets of immense value. Linguistic analysis has shown statistical patterns similar to natural languages, with word entropy matching that of English or Latin, which suggests there is a real message buried within the strangeness. However, other analyses point to features that are oddly repetitive and unlike any human language, leading to the tantalizing and controversial suggestion that the entire thing could be an elaborate nonsense text generated by a sophisticated medieval algorithm for the purpose of mystifying a wealthy patron. There is a more human theory, one that perhaps resonates most deeply with the spirit of the age in which it was created. It's possible the Voynich Manuscript is the work of a single, brilliant, and profoundly unwell mind. A person suffering from a severe mental illness, perhaps schizophrenia, might have produced this work in a sustained state of delirium, creating a complex private cosmology that made perfect sense only to them. The seemingly structured script could be a form of automatic writing or glossolalia, a sacred but meaningless language flowing from a fractured consciousness. This theory would explain why the text feels so ordered yet decodes into nothing. It was never meant to be read by anyone else. It was a map of a private, interior world, a world of green baths and imaginary stars forever locked away from our understanding. It remains the one book in the world that no one can read, a silent scream from the past that we can see but never hear. While the Voynich Manuscript presents a silent, solitary mystery, our next tale erupts with the clamor of marching soldiers and the shock of betrayal on a scale that would forever stain a day of the week. In the early hours of Friday, October the 13th, 1307, a synchronized operation of breathtaking audacity unfolded across the entire Kingdom of France. Under sealed orders from King Philip IV, royal officials and soldiers burst into commanderies, the local headquarters of the Knights Templar, arresting every member of the powerful religious order they could find. The charges read aloud were enough to make a devout medieval Christian shudder, denying Christ, spitting on the crucifix, engaging in obscene kissing rituals, worshipping idols, and committing acts of sodomy. In one swift, brutal move, the most formidable and wealthy military organization in the Christian world was brought to its knees, its members dragged from their beds to face imprisonment, torture, and a fate far worse. To understand why this happened, we must first appreciate the sheer power the Templars had accumulated. Founded in 1119 to protect pilgrims traveling to the Holy Land, the Order of the Poor Fellow Soldiers of Christ and of the Temple of Solomon quickly evolved into something much more. They were the special forces of the Crusades, a fearsome brotherhood of warrior monks bound by vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience. Their bravery was legendary, but their financial acumen was their true revolution. They established the first international banking system. A pilgrim could deposit funds at a Templar house in London and withdraw them in Jerusalem using a letter of credit, a system that protected them from robbery on the dangerous roads. They loaned vast sums to nobles and, most significantly, to kings. They amassed enormous landed estates and a legendary treasury, becoming the preeminent financiers of Europe. And this, ultimately, was their downfall. King Philip IV of France, known as Philip the Fair for his blonde hair and not his morals, was a monarch in deep financial trouble. His wars with England and Flanders had emptied the royal coffers, and he was deeply in debt to the very organization he now targeted. The Templars were a state within a state, owing allegiance only to the Pope, and Philip saw them not as holy warriors but as arrogant creditors who stood between him and absolute power. He needed to shatter their independence, seize their wealth, and cancel his debts, all while presenting himself as the devout defender of the faith, cleansing a cancer from the body of the Church. The arrests were just the beginning. What followed was a meticulously orchestrated campaign of propaganda and persecution. under the brutal torture sanctioned by the Inquisition, which Philip effectively controlled in France, Templars began to confess to the outlandish charges. They admitted to renouncing Christ to prepare for the harsh realities of captivity should they be captured by Muslims. The alleged idol, a mysterious bearded head known as Baphomet, was described under duress, though no such artifact was ever produced. These coerced confessions, extracted through methods like the strappado, where a man's hands were tied behind his back and he was hoisted into the air, dislocating his shoulders, were then used to pressure a reluctant Pope Clement V into launching a full investigation. The end of the order was slow and grim. After years of trials, the Pope officially dissolved the Knights Templar in 1312 under immense pressure from King Philip. The order's vast wealth and properties were ostensibly transferred to another military order, the Knights Hospitaller, though it is widely believed the French crown seized a significant portion of the movable treasure. The Grand Master of the Templars, Jacques de Molay, and his top preceptor were burned at the stake in Paris in 1314. From the flames, de Molay is famously said to have issued a curse, summoning both Pope Clement and King Philip to meet him before God within a year. In a chilling twist of fate, both men were dead within the year, lending an air of supernatural retribution to the sordid affair. This act of royal treachery gave birth to enduring myths that captivate us to this day. The suddenness of the arrests on a Friday the 13th is the reason that day is still considered unlucky centuries later, and the mystery of the Templar treasure persists. What happened to their legendary wealth, their extensive archives? Some believe that forewarned knights smuggled treasure out of France, perhaps even funding the rise of the Swiss banking system. Others speculate it was hidden, leading to wild theories that it was later discovered at Rosslyn Chapel in Scotland, or even that it was the fabled Holy Grail itself. The truth is likely more mundane, that much of it was absorbed by the French crown and the Hospitallers, but the romantic idea of a lost Templar treasure hidden from a greedy king continues to fuel novels and conspiracy theories, a final, defiant mystery from an order that was broken but never forgotten. While the downfall of the Templars was a grand political conspiracy playing out across an entire kingdom, our next mystery is a far more intimate and chilling one, confined within the cold stone walls of a single fortress. In the spring of 1483, England stood on a precipice. The charismatic and warrior King Edward IV was dead, leaving his 12-year-old son to inherit the throne as King Edward V. The boy king and his younger brother, 9-year-old Richard, Duke of York, were placed in the Tower of London not as prisoners but ostensibly for their own protection to await the young king's coronation. It was a common practice for monarchs to reside there before their crowning, but the coronation day never came. Instead, the two boys were seen less and less until they vanished from sight entirely, leaving behind a void of silence that has echoed through history for over 5 centuries. Their guardian and uncle, Richard, Duke of Gloucester, had been named Lord Protector to rule on the boy king's behalf, but Richard moved with swift and ruthless ambition. He declared his brother's marriage to the boy's mother, Elizabeth Woodville, invalid and their children illegitimate, thereby stripping young Edward V of his right to the throne. With breathtaking speed, Parliament petitioned Richard himself to take the crown, which he did, becoming King Richard III. The two princes were now not just inconvenient, they were a direct threat to the legitimacy of his new reign. They were moved into the inner apartments of the Tower, and after the summer of 1483, they were never seen in public again. The prime suspect has always been Richard III. He had the motive, the means, and the opportunity. The boys were in his custody under his command. Their existence threatened his tenuous claim to the crown, and their removal would have been the most direct and permanent solution to his political problem. Contemporary sources, though written under the Tudor regime that followed him, are nearly unanimous in pointing the finger at Richard. Sir Thomas More, in his history, provided a detailed account of two men, Sir James Tyrrell, acting on Richard's orders, smothering the boys in their sleep and burying them at the foot of a staircase. While More's account was written decades later and has some inaccuracies, it cemented the popular narrative of the evil, hunchbacked uncle, but Richard is far from the only suspect. The next king, Henry VII, who defeated Richard at the Battle of Bosworth Field, had an equally powerful motive to see the princes gone. His own claim to the throne was incredibly weak, based on a distant lineage and a victory in battle. If the princes were still alive, they would have been the rightful heirs, a far greater threat to Henry than Richard had ever been. By taking the throne, Henry had every reason to ensure they were never heard from again. He also had the means. He could have quietly disposed of them after his victory. Notably, he never produced the boys alive to legitimize his reign, nor did he ever launch a serious investigation into their fate, which many see as deeply suspicious. Other theories point to powerful nobles like the Duke of Buckingham, who may have acted without Richard's direct orders to win favor, or even that the boys were secretly smuggled abroad to live in obscurity. But the most compelling physical evidence emerged nearly 2 centuries later. In 1674, during renovations to the tower, workmen discovered a wooden chest buried beneath a staircase leading to the chapel of the White Tower. Inside were the small skeletons of 2 children. King Charles II, believing these to be the remains of the princes, had them interred in a marble urn in Westminster Abbey. A later examination confirmed the bones were of children the right age, though modern scientific analysis has been refused, leaving their identity forever technically unproven but widely accepted. This historical mystery was tragically amplified by one of the world's greatest storytellers, William Shakespeare, writing during the reign of the last Tudor monarch, Queen Elizabeth I, granddaughter of Henry VII, had every political incentive to vilify the previous regime. His play Richard III is not a historical document but a masterpiece of propaganda, painting Richard as a monstrous, physically deformed villain who stops at nothing, including the murder of his own young nephews to seize power. Shakespeare's iconic portrayal has forever shaped the public perception of Richard, turning a complex historical figure into a pantomime villain and cementing the story of the wicked uncle in the cultural consciousness. This enduring mystery continues to spark passionate debate among historians today, dividing them into camps known as Ricardians and anti-Ricardians. The Richard III Society, devoted to rehabilitating the king's image, argues passionately that he was an enlightened reformer unfairly maligned by Tudor historians. They point out that he had no need to kill the boys after he had already legally disinherited them, and that he never formally accused of the crime during his lifetime by his enemies. The other side counters that legal disinheritance was a flimsy shield against future rebellion, and that only their deaths could truly secure his throne. The truth is, we will almost certainly never know for certain. The disappearance of the princes in the tower remains the perfect historical crime, a chilling void at the heart of English history that continues to fascinate us not just for the question of whodunit, but for what it reveals about the brutal calculus of power and the fragility of truth itself. Leaving behind the dark political intrigues of the Tower of London, we journey next to a rural English county where a mystery of an entirely different, almost supernatural nature imprinted itself upon the landscape. On the night of February 8, 1855, a heavy snowfall blanketed the countryside of South Devon, creating a pristine white canvas. But when the residents of the small villages around the Exe estuary awoke the following morning, they were met with a sight that defied all rational explanation. Crisscrossing the entire district, spanning an estimated distance of over 100 miles, was a single, continuous trail of hoof-like marks. These were not the random tracks of a stray animal. They formed a perfect, unbroken line, as if a creature with a single, cloven hoof had walked a straight path with a purposeful, mechanical gait. The footprints themselves were bizarre. Each was shaped like a horseshoe, approximately 4 inches long and 3 inches across, and they were spaced from 8 to 16 inches apart in a precise single file line. The truly inexplicable part was their path. This trail did not detour for anything. It went straight up to the high walls of haystacks and continued in a perfect line over the top, descending the other side. It was found on the tops of 14-foot-high walls. It traversed the steep, snow-covered roofs of houses and barns. It even appeared to cross the 2-mile-wide estuary of the River Ixie itself, as if the creator had simply walked over the surface of the water. The trail went through dense brambles and hedgerows, through pipe drains as narrow as 4 inches in diameter, and was reported from over 30 different parishes. The sheer scale and impossibility of the path sent a wave of panic and superstitious dread through the devoutly religious population. In an age where folklore and belief in the supernatural were still woven into the fabric of daily life, the explanation seemed terrifyingly obvious to many. The people of Devon believed they were witnessing the literal footprints of the devil, come to punish the wicked or signal an impending apocalypse. The local press fanned these flames with headlines screaming of the devil's visit and his infernal majesty's travels. Church sermons were dedicated to the phenomenon, and many were afraid to leave their homes after dark, fearing an encounter with the mysterious entity that had trespassed so brazenly across the entire county. Of course, the rational minds of the time scrambled for a scientific explanation. The most prominent theory proposed by the naturalist Sir Richard Owen was that the tracks were made by badgers. He suggested the animals had wandered out of their dens during a thaw, creating the distinctive double mark that could appear as a single line. This explanation, however, was widely ridiculed. The distance covered was far too great for a single badger. The prints went in a relentless straight line without the meandering one would expect from a foraging animal, and perhaps most damningly, the prints showed no signs of claws or the distinct gait of a badger. Others proposed an escaped kangaroo from a private menagerie, but this failed to account for the cloven hoof shape and again the aquatic and aerial nature of the path. Modern investigators have put forward more plausible, though still debated, theories. One of the most compelling involves experimental weather balloons. In 1855, the Devonport dockyard was a hub of naval innovation, and it is known that they were testing new types of balloon and barrage designs. Some have suggested that a balloon trailing a broken shackle or chain link could have been buffeted by high winds, bouncing along and imprinting the snow in a continuous straight line for miles. This would explain the supernaturally straight path, the ability to walk over roofs and walls, and even to cross the river. The specific hoof-like shape could have been created by a particular type of metal linkage. Another theory points to atmospheric phenomena, suggesting that a rare combination of freezing and thawing conditions could have created a series of ice melt holes that coincidentally resembled hoof prints, though this does little to explain their organized, linear progression over such varied terrain. The event left an indelible mark on the region's culture, becoming a cornerstone of local legend. It serves as a perfect snapshot of a moment when the Victorian era's rapid scientific advancement collided head-on with deep-seated ancient superstition. For a brief, terrifying period, it seemed as if the supernatural had irrefutably announced its presence in the modern world, leaving a trail of evidence that, to this day, has never been conclusively explained. The Devil's Footprints remain one of history's most peculiar one-night mysteries, a phantom walker whose identity is as elusive now as it was on that cold February morning over 160 years ago. But the violent currents of history have a strange way of preserving what they also seek to destroy, and perhaps no story illustrates this paradox better than the fate of the Lindisfarne Gospels. Our journey now takes us to a windswept island off the northeast coast of England, to the holy island of Lindisfarne and to the year 793. For the monks of the monastery there, this was a place of serene scholarship and profound devotion. a spiritual powerhouse founded by the Irish monk Saint Aidan. It was here that some of the most breathtakingly beautiful artworks of the entire medieval world were created, the illuminated manuscripts, and chief among them, the Lindisfarne Gospels. This book was a masterpiece, a copy of the 4 Gospels of the New Testament, but it was so much more than just text. Its pages were a riot of intricate, hypnotic patterns, of spirals and knots woven into a sacred carpet of color and gold. Biblical figures were rendered with a stunning blend of Celtic, Germanic, and even Mediterranean influences, a testament to the far-reaching connections of this isolated community. The creation of this single book was an act of immense piety, believed to be the work of one man, the monk Eadfrith, who became Bishop of Lindisfarne in 698. It is thought he dedicated years, perhaps decades, of his life to this single, sacred task, a physical prayer rendered in vellum and ink. The tranquility of this holy endeavor was shattered on a June morning in 793. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, the great history of the era, records the event with a tone of sheer, unvarnished horror. The ravages of heathen men miserably destroyed God's church on Lindisfarne with plunder and slaughter. For the monks, the sight on the horizon would have been one of pure terror, the dragon-proud longships of the Vikings. These Norse raiders from Scandinavia were the ultimate shock troops of the early medieval world, and their attack on Lindisfarne is often cited as the beginning of the Viking Age in England. Their motivation was not religious hatred but simple, brutal opportunity. A monastery on an island was poorly defended, isolated, and most importantly, filled with unimaginable wealth. Not just gold and silver liturgical vessels, but the very books themselves, whose covers were often bejeweled with precious stones and metals. The raid was a calculated act of sacrilege and theft. Monks were killed or enslaved, the church was desecrated, and the treasury was looted. The priceless Gospels, along with other treasures, were ripped from their home and carried away across the stormy North Sea. For the monks who survived, this was more than a physical attack. It was an existential and spiritual catastrophe. How could God allow his most holy place to be violated by pagan invaders? The event sent a shockwave of fear throughout Christian Europe. The scholar Alcuin of York, writing from the court of Charlemagne, summed up the despair, asking, "Is this the beginning of greater suffering? Has the fire of God's wrath been kindled by our sins?" The Lindisfarne Gospels, that sublime object of faith, was now a prize of war, a spoil of conquest. Its fate seemed sealed, likely to be torn apart for its gem-encrusted cover, its vellum pages discarded or reused for something crude. Its sacred story appeared to be over. Yet, this is where the mystery deepens. Against all odds, the book survived, not just as a fragment, but almost in its entirety. It did not resurface for centuries, and its journey during those lost years is a complete blank in the historical record. We can only speculate. Did it remain in the possession of a Viking chieftain who, despite his paganism, recognized its immense value and beauty? Was it traded, perhaps ending up in a Norse settlement in Ireland or elsewhere? Or was it, as some have theorized, actually rescued by the monks themselves? There are accounts that the community of Lindisfarne, after repeated Viking attacks, eventually fled their island home, taking the body of their patron saint Cuthbert and their most precious relics on a long, wandering exile across northern England. It is a beautiful thought that they might have saved the Gospels too, carrying this heavy, precious book with them for decades, protecting it through countless dangers until they found a permanent home at Durham. While the historical evidence for the Gospel's specific journey is thin, its survival is nothing short of a miracle. It represents 1,000 individual decisions not to destroy it, a thread of appreciation for its artistry that somehow persisted even through an age of immense violence and cultural clash. The Gospels finally re-emerged into the historical light in the 17th century, when they were recorded in the collection of Sir Robert Cotton, a famed antiquarian whose library formed the foundation of the British Museum. Its survival allows us to understand not just the artistic genius of its creator, but the complex, interconnected world he lived in. The book is a cultural mosaic. The script is a magnificent Latin, but it also contains the earliest known translation of the Gospels into English, added between the lines by a priest named Aldred in the 10th century. Its artistry pulls from the Celtic love of complex abstraction, from Anglo-Saxon animal interlace, and even from classical Mediterranean motifs seen in the robes of the evangelists, suggesting the monks had access to art from the late Roman world. It is a silent witness to an international age of ideas, a beacon of light that somehow endured centuries of darkness. Today, it is housed in the British Library in London, a permanent testament to the resilience of beauty and the enduring power of a story that was almost lost to the sea. After the Phantom Walker left its mark on the snow and the Viking raiders faded back into the mists of the North Sea, a far greater and more terrifying spectre descended upon the medieval world, one that did not vanish in a single night but lingered for years, reshaping civilization itself. The Black Death, the single most devastating pandemic in human history, arrived in Europe in 1347 and proceeded to wipe out an estimated 30 to 50% of the entire continent's population in just a few horrific years. The scale of the suffering is almost incomprehensible. Entire villages were wiped off the map, city streets were piled with corpses, and the very social and religious order was shaken to its core. And then, as suddenly as it had arrived, the plague began to recede. By the early 1350s, the great wave of death had largely passed, though it would return in smaller, cyclical outbreaks for centuries. The mystery is not just why it was so deadly, but why it finally began to fade away. One of the most straightforward and widely accepted explanations is the development of herd immunity. The Yersinia pestis bacterium, which causes the plague, is a vicious but inefficient killer. It relies on its hosts, whether human or the fleas that lived on black rats, to spread. When a pathogen is that deadly, it can burn through a susceptible population with terrifying speed, but it eventually runs out of viable hosts. Those who survived the initial onslaught through either robust health or pure luck may have carried a natural genetic resistance that they passed on to their children. Over time, the population that remained was simply harder for the plague to infect, creating a biological firebreak that slowed the disease's progress to a manageable smolder instead of a roaring inferno. Yet, biology is only one piece of this complex puzzle. The climate of Europe was also changing during this period. The medieval warm period, which had allowed for population expansion and thriving agriculture, was coming to an end, giving way to the cooler, more volatile conditions of the Little Ice Age. This shift in weather patterns could have had a profound impact on the disease's ecosystem. Colder, wetter weather might have reduced the population of the black rat, the primary carrier of the fleas responsible for transmission. It could also have affected the flea life cycle itself or the stability of the bacterium in the environment. A changing climate may have inadvertently disrupted the precise chain of transmission that the plague relied upon, slowly starving it of the conditions it needed to thrive. Human intervention, however, may have played the most crucial role. Faced with an invisible, unstoppable enemy, medieval societies were forced to innovate out of sheer desperation. The most famous example comes from the port city of Ragusa, modern-day Dubrovnik. In 1377, the city's rulers instituted a groundbreaking policy. All ships and trade caravans arriving from plague-infested areas were required to wait in isolation for a period of 30 days before being allowed to enter the city. This period was later extended to 40 days, giving us the term quarantine from the Italian quaranta giorni, meaning 40 days. This was a revolutionary concept, a state-mandated public health measure based on the then unknown principle of limiting the movement of infected individuals. Other Italian city-states like Venice and Milan adopted similar measures, and while their understanding of germ theory was centuries away, they correctly intuited that separation could stop the spread. This early form of social distancing, crude as it was, likely saved countless lives and helped break the cycle of transmission that had fueled the pandemic's initial fury. The end of the plague's peak also had seismic societal consequences that reverberated for centuries. With such a massive portion of the workforce dead, the survivors found themselves in a position of unprecedented power. The feudal system, which relied on a vast, cheap labor force tied to the land, began to crumble. Serfs could now demand wages for their work and leave their manor in search of better opportunities, leading to higher wages and better living standards for the common person. This shift in economic power directly contributed to peasant revolts like the English Peasants' Revolt of 1381, where commoners demanded an end to serfdom and more rights. The sheer scale of death also profoundly challenged the authority of the Catholic Church. Prayers and processions had done nothing to stop the plague, and the loss of so many clergy members who had ministered to the dying created a crisis of faith. This disillusionment with religious institutions would later fuel the critical and independent thinking that blossomed into the Renaissance and the Reformation. In the end, the retreat of the Black Death was likely not due to a single miracle cure or event, but a perfect storm of these factors converging. A population developing biological resistance, a climate shifting in a way that was hostile to the disease's vectors, and humanity's first clumsy but determined steps toward organized public health all combined to gradually push back the tide of death. The plague never truly disappeared. It would return in waves for another 300 years. But the end of its initial apocalyptic phase stands as a testament to the resilience of both the human body and the human spirit, a slow, hard-fought victory snatched from the jaws of absolute despair. But even as societies began to rebuild from the ashes of the plague, the human experience remained punctuated by phenomena that defied any rational understanding, echoing fears and wonders that transcended the centuries. While our next mystery is a modern one, its roots dig deep into a very medieval way of perceiving the world, a world where unexplained sounds were never just sounds but messages, warnings, or portents. In the early 1990s, in the beautiful high desert town of Taos, New Mexico, a strange and persistent complaint began to emerge. A small portion of the town's residents started hearing a low, relentless, rumbling hum. It was described as a distant diesel engine idling, a deep vibration that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. This was the Taos hum, an infrasound phenomenon that has been heard by a consistent 2% of the population, a select group of people whose ears are attuned to a frequency that for others is simply silence. What makes the Taos hum so baffling is its selectivity. Not everyone can hear it. For those who can, it's often a source of immense distress, causing sleepless nights, headaches, and a feeling of maddening isolation, as they are plagued by a noise no one else believes is there. Scientific investigations have been launched, with teams from prestigious universities and government agencies descending on Taos with sophisticated listening equipment. Yet every time they have come up empty. No definitive source for the sound has ever been recorded or identified. Theories have ranged from the mundane to the extraordinary underground geological activity, secret military communication systems, electromagnetic radiation, or even the collective hum of industrial equipment from far away, focused and amplified by the unique atmospheric conditions of the desert bowl Taos sits in. But without a verifiable source, the hum remains an enigma, a sensory experience without a cause. This modern mystery finds a powerful and eerie resonance when we look back through medieval chronicles. In an age without the constant industrial din of our modern world, the auditory landscape was very different. Unexplained sounds stood out with terrifying clarity and were almost universally interpreted through a spiritual or superstitious lens. Chroniclers wrote of aerial battles heard over England, with the clashing of swords and cries of phantom armies echoing from the skies, sounds we might now attribute to rare atmospheric acoustics or seismic activity, but which were then seen as clear omens of coming war or divine judgment. The sudden, violent boom of a meteorite exploding in the atmosphere, a phenomenon we call a bolide, was recorded as the dragon's roar, a sure sign of God's wrath. Church bells were believed to ring on their own to warn of impending disaster, and the howling of the wind through a ruin could be interpreted as the screams of trapped souls in purgatory. In the medieval worldview, there was no such thing as a meaningless sound. The universe was a place of constant divine communication, and any auditory anomaly was a message to be decoded. A mysterious hum might be the sound of the earth itself groaning under the weight of human sin, or the distant choir of angels, or the grinding machinery of the universe that was only audible in moments of heightened spiritual awareness. For those who heard these things, it was not a scientific curiosity. It was a deeply personal, often terrifying encounter with the unknown. They were living in a world that spoke to them, and the message was often one of warning. The Tao's hum and these medieval accounts are connected by more than just the shared experience of strange noise. They are linked by the profound human need to find meaning in sensation. Where science has so far failed to provide a concrete answer for the residents of Taos, the mind seeks its own explanations, often venturing into the realm of conspiracy or the paranormal. This is the same cognitive process that led a medieval farmer to interpret a peculiar rumble as a sign from heaven. The key difference is the framework for belief. Today, we seek a technological or geological culprit, a secret government project, or a unique fault line. In the Middle Ages, they sought a theological one. Both are attempts to rationalize the irrational, to place a comforting label on a deeply unsettling experience that exists just beyond the edge of understanding. This enduring phenomenon challenges the very line we draw between the objective world and our subjective perception of it. The Tao's hum is real to those who hear it, just as the aerial battles were real to those who recorded them. Whether the source is ultimately found to be a unique form of tinnitus, a geological vibration, or something else entirely, its power lies in its mystery. It reminds us that even in our hyper-connected, scientifically mapped world, there are still experiences that isolate us, that whisper just beyond the range of common perception, and that connect us across centuries to an ancient human truth. Sometimes the world makes a noise and we are simply left to wonder what it means. But our journey into the unknown now takes a turn from ethereal sounds to a far more tangible, yet equally elusive treasure, one said to be buried deep beneath the very stones of Moscow. The legend of the lost library of the Tsars, often called the Library of Ivan the Terrible, is a historical mystery that has tantalized treasure hunters, historians, and archaeologists for centuries. It is the story of a promised collection of ancient knowledge so vast and priceless that its discovery would be the literary equivalent of finding Atlantis. The core of the legend claims that somewhere beneath the Russian capital lies a hidden chamber, a subterranean vault containing the lost literary treasures of the Byzantine Empire, and with them the answers to countless historical questions. The story begins not with Ivan, but with his grandmother, Sophia Paleolog, a Byzantine princess born in the final days of the Roman Empire. Sophia was a woman of immense sophistication and learning. In 1472, she married Grand Prince Ivan III of Moscow, and in doing so, she brought more than just a royal title to the nascent Russian state. She brought a powerful symbol of continuity, a living link to the glory of Constantinople, which had fallen to the Ottoman Turks just 19 years earlier. According to the legend, Sophia did not come empty-handed. Her dowry was said to include a vast portion of the imperial library of the Byzantine emperors, a collection of ancient Greek and Roman manuscripts that had been safeguarded for a millennium. This was not just a random assortment of books, it was a cultural ark containing irreplaceable works of history, philosophy, and science that were believed to have been lost to the Western world forever. Whispers persisted that among the scrolls were lost plays by Sophocles, the complete histories of Rome, and even unknown dialogues by Aristotle himself. The library was then purportedly expanded by her grandson, Ivan IV, known to history as Ivan the Terrible. A man of terrifying contradictions, Ivan was a paranoid and brutal tyrant, but he was also deeply devout and surprisingly erudite, with a genuine passion for learning and theological debate. He is said to have cherished this collection, adding to it with texts captured from the city of Kazan and other conquests. He reportedly had the entire library catalogued and even showed portions of it to foreign ambassadors as a demonstration of Moscow's growing power and cultural prestige. But after his death in 1584, the library vanished without a trace. It simply disappeared from all historical records, giving birth to the tantalizing mystery that has endured for over 400 years. The most popular theory is that Ivan, in his characteristic paranoia, had the entire collection hidden away in a secret network of tunnels and chambers beneath the Kremlin or elsewhere in Moscow, a treasure so precious he could not bear for it to fall into the hands of his successors or enemies. The search for this bibliographic holy grail has been relentless. It captivated the German scholar and mystic Adam Olarius in the 17th century. It prompted Tsar Peter the Great to order extensive excavations beneath the Kremlin in the 18th century. Most famously, it drew the attention of the Soviet government itself. In the 1930s, as part of Stalin's grandiose project to rebuild Moscow, workers digging the foundations for the new metro system were under strict orders to report any unusual subterranean findings. The secret police, the NKVD, even established a special division to investigate the legend, hoping that such a discovery would provide a massive propaganda victory, proving that Russia was the true heir to classical civilization. These searches, however, turned up nothing but more tunnels, cellars, and the grim remnants of Ivan's own torture chambers. The skepticism from the academic community is understandably profound. Many historians argue that the entire legend is a myth, a folktale that grew from a small kernel of truth. They point out that there is no definitive, contemporary inventory of Sophia's dowry that lists such a library. The accounts of ambassadors who supposedly saw it are often vague and could be describing a respectable royal collection, not the legendary lost archive of Byzantium. Furthermore, the practicalities of moving such a vast collection of delicate manuscripts from a falling Constantinople to a distant medieval Moscow would have been a Herculean task, one that likely would have left more of a paper trail in other European courts. The most likely scenario, skeptics suggest, is that Sophia brought a respectable personal library of religious and classical texts, a treasure in its own right, and that over time, through wishful thinking and national pride, its size and importance were magnified into the stuff of legend. Yet the dream refuses to die. Modern technology has given new hope to seekers. Ground-penetrating radar has revealed extensive and unexplored voids and tunnels beneath the Kremlin and the old Kitai-Gorod district of Moscow. These aren't just empty spaces, they are complex archaeological sites, flooded, collapsed, or simply too dangerous to access. Every few years, a new expedition is proposed, armed with more sophisticated sonar and seismic equipment, promising to finally solve the mystery. They are driven by the same irresistible question: what if even a fraction of the legend is true? The discovery of a single lost text from antiquity can reshape our understanding of history. To find an entire library would be an event of incalculable importance, a window into a lost world of thought. The lost library of the Tsars is more than a treasure hunt. It is a testament to the enduring power of knowledge itself, and the haunting idea that the greatest works of the ancient world might not be dust, but simply waiting in the dark, silent and patient for us to find them. High on the sun-baked mesas and tucked into the sheer cliff faces of the American Southwest, the stone cities of the ancestral Pueblones, often called the Anasazi, stand as silent, haunting monuments to a vanished world. By the end of the 13th century, these sophisticated communities, which had thrived for centuries, were completely deserted. The cliff dwellings at places like Mesa Verde and Choco Canyon were abandoned with an almost shocking rapidity. Pots were left on hearths, tools were set down in workrooms, and granaries still held their carefully stored maize. It was as if the entire population had simply walked away one day, leaving their homes and possessions behind for the elements to reclaim. This mass exodus from a heartland they had occupied for over a millennium is one of North America's greatest archaeological mysteries, a puzzle of environmental and social collapse that echoes the fates of medieval societies an ocean away. To understand the scale of this disappearance, we must first appreciate the brilliance of the culture that vanished. The ancestral Puebloans were master architects, engineers, and astronomers. At Choco Canyon, they constructed massive, multi-storied great houses with hundreds of rooms aligned precisely with solar and lunar cycles. They built an extensive network of straight roads that radiated out across the desert for miles, connecting distant communities. Their society was complex, almost certainly hierarchical, and deeply spiritual. Then, within a generation or two, it all came to an end. The great houses fell silent, the roads were no longer traveled, and the people dispersed, eventually becoming the ancestors of modern Pueblo tribes like the Hopi and Zuni. The question that has haunted historians and archaeologists for over a century is, why would a successful, advanced society abandon everything so completely? The most compelling and widely supported explanation points to a catastrophic climate shift, a megadrought. Tree ring data, which provides an astonishingly precise record of annual rainfall, reveals that the late 13th century was plagued by a prolonged and severe drought, one of the worst in the region's history. For a culture living on the knife's edge of survival in an arid environment, this was a death sentence. Their intricate systems of water catchment and agriculture, so perfectly attuned to normal patterns, would have failed utterly. Springs dried up, crops withered in the fields, and the delicate balance between population and resources shattered. The social contract, built on the ability of leaders to ensure food and water, would have collapsed under the strain of famine and thirst. In this light, the abandonment was not a mystery but a necessity, a desperate migration in search of a place where the rain still fell. However, the story is likely more complex than a single cause. The archaeological record reveals another, darker element: widespread violence. In the final decades before the abandonment, settlements became more defensive. Communities moved from open mesas to nearly inaccessible cliff alcoves, and many sites show evidence of fortifications and burning. At certain locations, there is grim evidence of massacres, with bodies found showing signs of traumatic death and even cannibalism. This suggests that as resources dwindled, competition turned lethal. Warfare and raiding between different groups, or perhaps internal social unrest, could have fractured the society from within. The beautiful, interconnected Chacon world may have devolved into a nightmare of conflict, making the cliff dwellings not just homes but fortified refuges from neighboring enemies. The decision to leave may have been driven as much by the fear of other people as by the fear of starvation. This pattern of a sophisticated society succumbing to a combination of environmental stress and social fragmentation has a powerful parallel in the medieval world, specifically with the mysterious collapse of the Norse Greenland settlements. Established by Eric the Red around 985, these Viking communities thrived for centuries, building stone churches, farming, and trading walrus ivory with Europe. But by the mid-15th century, they too had vanished. Just like the ancestral Puebloans, the Norse Greenlanders faced a changing climate, the onset of the Little Ice Age, which brought colder temperatures and shortened growing seasons. They also faced external pressure from increasingly hostile encounters with the Thule people, the ancestors of the Inuit, and from economic collapse as the market for walrus ivory dried up. Crucially, like the Anasazi, they exhibited a cultural inflexibility that may have sealed their fate. The Norse stubbornly clung to their European identity, raising dairy cattle and building churches while refusing to adopt the successful survival strategies of the Inuit, who thrived by hunting seals and whales. This inability to adapt to change their fundamental way of life in the face of overwhelming change is a tragic commonality between these two distant cultures. Both were ultimately defeated by a changing world they could not or would not change with. The true explanation for the Anasazi disappearance likely lies in a toxic cocktail of all these factors. A devastating drought undermined their economic foundation, triggering warfare over scarce resources. This social unrest, in turn, shattered the religious and political authority that held their complex society together. Facing environmental catastrophe and human violence, the people made the only rational choice left. They voted with their feet. They broke into smaller groups and migrated south and east, eventually merging with other communities to form the Pueblo villages that still exist today. Their disappearance was not an extinction but a diaspora. The empty cliff dwellings are not a tomb but a testament to resilience, a people who chose to abandon the stone monuments of their past to ensure a future for their culture and their descendants. Their story is a powerful reminder that the collapse of a civilization is rarely a simple event, but a complex unraveling of the bonds between people, their leaders, and the land that sustains them. Though his empire stretched from the North Sea to Sicily, a realm of such complexity it was famously called a miracle of the world, Emperor Frederick II of Hohenstaufen spent much of his life locked in a bitter, world-shaking struggle. Crowned Holy Roman Emperor in 1220, Frederick was a figure of profound contradiction, a man so far ahead of his time that his contemporaries often viewed him with a mixture of awe and terror. He was known as Stupa Mundi, the wonder of the world, a polymath who spoke 6 languages, authored a groundbreaking scientific book on falconry, and presided over a cosmopolitan court where Christian, Muslim, and Jewish scholars debated freely. Yet this very enlightenment, his tolerance for Islamic culture, and his relentless wars against papal power led to his excommunication not once but twice. Pope Gregory IX even labeled him the Antichrist. When Frederick died suddenly in 1250, the question of his soul's final resting place was a matter of intense, politically charged debate. Was this brilliant, excommunicated emperor a divine ruler or a servant of the devil? The answer, many believed, would be written on his corpse. Following his death, his body was prepared for burial and interred in a grand porphyry sarcophagus in the Cathedral of Palermo, Sicily, alongside his Norman ancestors. For decades he rested there, a controversial figure slowly receding into legend. Then, nearly 30 years later, a compelling political need arose to revisit his tomb. His grandson, Frederick III of Sicily, sought to strengthen his own claim to the imperial title and needed to bolster the family's sacred reputation. To do this, he ordered the exhumation of his grandfather's body. When the heavy stone lid was pried open, those present were met with a sight that defied all medieval understanding of death and decay. The emperor's body was found not in a state of decomposition, but in a condition of perfect preservation. His skin was intact, his eyes were closed as if in sleep, and his royal robes appeared untouched by time. In an age where the rapid and gruesome decay of the body was a constant, visible reminder of human mortality and sin, this was nothing short of miraculous. The reaction to this discovery was immediate and polarized, splitting directly along the political and religious fault lines Frederick himself had created in life. For his supporters, the Ghibellines, this was incontrovertible proof of his sanctity. In medieval theology, the incorruptibility of the body was a well-known sign of God's favor, a miracle bestowed upon saints to testify to their purity and holy life. The fact that an excommunicant could be found in such a state was a powerful symbolic weapon against the papacy, suggesting that the Church's judgment had been wrong and that God had welcomed Frederick into his grace. They saw it as divine validation of his imperial authority. For his enemies, the Guelphs who supported papal supremacy, the same phenomenon could only be explained by dark magic. They whispered that such preservation was not a mark of holiness but of witchcraft and a diabolical pact. The devil, they claimed, had preserved his favorite son. This single body lying in its tomb became a battleground for the soul of Christendom, a physical object over which two competing visions of divine truth fought for supremacy. This event also thrust Frederick's remains directly into the heart of medieval relic culture, a world where the physical remains of the holy dead were not just objects of veneration but sources of immense spiritual and political power. The possession of a saint's relic, a finger, a skull, a vial of blood, could make a cathedral a major pilgrimage site, bringing wealth, prestige, and divine favor to a city. An entire incorrupt body was the ultimate prize, the most powerful relic imaginable. Frederick's son, Manfred, seemed to understand this immediately. Following the first exhumation, he allegedly ordered that the emperor's body be stripped of its valuable garments, which were then distributed as powerful relics to loyal supporters. This act transformed the emperor from a mere historical figure into a source of sacred objects, his very clothing now imbued with the perceived power of his miraculous preservation. The body was exhumed several more times over the centuries, each time reportedly found in the same incorrupt state, fueling the legend further. In the 18th century, a detailed examination was finally conducted. The findings then suggested a far more mundane explanation for the miracle. The emperor had been meticulously embalmed. The process likely involved evisceration, the removal of internal organs, and the body being treated with aromatic spices and resins before being sewn into a lead shroud. This was an exceptionally sophisticated preservation technique for the time, one that reflected Frederick's high status and his exposure to advanced medical knowledge from the Arab world through his court in Sicily. The miracle was actually a testament to human skill and science, a final irony for the emperor known as the wonder of the world. Yet, even with this rational explanation, the power of the story endures. It perfectly captures the medieval mindset, where the line between science and the divine was endlessly blurred, and where a ruler's physical body was the ultimate canvas upon which his subjects projected their deepest fears, their highest hopes, and their eternal struggle to understand the will of God. While the perfectly preserved body of an emperor spoke of divine mysteries in a royal crypt, a very different kind of terror was stalking the rustic, isolated province of Gévaudan in south-central France. Beginning in the summer of 1764, the peaceful mountain villages were plunged into a nightmare that would last for 3 years. The attacker was not a foreign army or a band of outlaws, but a single, monstrous creature that seemed to emerge straight from the darkest corners of folklore. This was the Beast of Gévaudan, an animal whose very existence became a national obsession and whose true nature remains one of history's most chilling enigmas. The first recorded attack occurred in June when a young woman tending cattle saw a fearsome animal burst from the tree line. She described it as a wolf-like beast, but of a size and ferocity that defied belief. It was said to be as large as a calf, with a broad, powerful chest, a long tail ending in a tuft, and a distinctly reddish coat streaked with black. Its head was enormous, with formidable teeth and strangely small, pointed ears. Most terrifying of all were its reported behaviors. This was no ordinary predator skulking in the shadows. It displayed a shocking boldness, attacking people in broad daylight, often in front of witnesses, and showing a clear preference for human flesh over livestock. Its method of killing was particularly gruesome, often decapitating its victims. Over the next several months, the body count grew at an alarming rate. The victims were predominantly women and children, those most vulnerable while tending flocks in the remote high pastures. The rural community was paralyzed by a fear that felt biblical in its intensity. As news of the atrocities spread, the local government responded by organizing hunts. Professional wolf hunters were brought in, and hundreds of ordinary citizens took up arms, but their efforts were futile. The beast seemed to possess an almost supernatural cunning, evading traps and ambushes with ease and disappearing back into the impenetrable forests and volcanic landscapes of the Margeride Mountains after each attack. The failure of these local efforts, combined with the gruesome details reported in the emerging popular press, transformed the story from a regional tragedy into a national sensation. Pamphlets and newspapers in Paris were filled with lurid accounts, and the public's imagination ran wild. In an age still steeped in superstition, the explanation seemed obvious to many: this was no natural wolf. The peasants of Gévaudan believed they were being hunted by a loup-garou, a werewolf. Others speculated it was a hellhound, a demonic punishment sent by God for their sins. The beast became a symbol of primordial evil, a monster from a fairy tale made horrifyingly real. The panic eventually reached the court of King Louis XV at Versailles. The continuing attacks were not just a humanitarian disaster, they were becoming an embarrassment to the crown, a sign that the royal government could not even protect its most isolated subjects from a single animal. Eager to demonstrate his power and benevolence, the king took personal charge of the crisis. He sent two of his own professional huntsmen, Jean-Charles Marc-Antoine Vomisil de Neville and his son, François-Antoine, who bore the honorific port Arquebus du Roi, the king's gun-bearer. These men were aristocracy of the hunt, famed throughout France for their skill in killing wolves. They arrived in Gévaudan with a pack of prized bloodhounds and the full expectation of a quick victory. Yet the beast humiliated them. For months they found nothing but frustration. The creature continued its attacks right under their noses, its apparent intelligence outstripping their best strategies. Their failure only deepened the mystery and the public's fear. Finally, in June of 1767, François-Antoine achieved what seemed to be the decisive victory. After a massive hunt involving thousands of beaters to drive the animal into the open, he confronted and killed a massive, atypical grey wolf measuring over 5 feet long. The animal was stuffed and sent to Versailles as a trophy, and the king declared the affair over. Antoine was hailed as a hero, but the celebrations were premature. Within a short time, attacks began again. The beast, or perhaps a beast, was back. This forced the humiliating admission that the king's own huntsman had killed the wrong animal. The task then fell to a local nobleman, Jean Chastel. In a moment steeped in legend, Chastel is said to have loaded his rifle with silver bullets, made from melted-down religious medallions, and gone to hunt the creature on June 19, 1767. His story goes that he was reading the Bible when the beast emerged from the woods. As it charged, he calmly raised his gun, fired, and killed it with a single silver shot. The animal Chastel killed was even stranger than the first. Contemporary accounts describe a creature of horrific appearance, with unusual anatomy that baffled those who examined it. The corpse was paraded through the terrified villages before being, like the first, sent to Versailles. Unfortunately, the remains rapidly decomposed and were disposed of, lost to history before any proper scientific examination could be conducted. With Chastel's kill, the attacks finally, definitively ceased. The nightmare was over, but the central mystery had only just begun. What was the Beast of Gévaudan? The official royal conclusion was that it was simply a very large, unusually aggressive wolf or a pack of wolves. This is the most accepted theory today. A combination of panic and the sensationalist press could have amplified the details of attacks from several animals into the legend of a single monster. However, the detailed physical descriptions from hundreds of eyewitnesses consistently point to an animal that didn't quite match a standard European wolf. This has led to a plethora of alternative theories. Some propose it was a hyena escaped from a traveling menagerie whose powerful jaws and spotted coat could match some descriptions. Others suggest a surviving specimen of a dire wolf or a prehistoric predator, though this is highly unlikely. Perhaps the most compelling theory is that it was a large wolf-dog hybrid. Such an animal, possessing the size of a wolf but lacking its natural fear of humans, could have been the perfect, fearless man-eater. The legend of Jean Chastel's silver bullet and the beast's supernatural cunning have cemented its place not just in history, but in the realm of myth, a terrifying reminder of a time when the wilderness still held terrors that reason alone could not explain. While the Beast of Gévaudan stalked the land, the vast, uncharted oceans of the medieval world held terrors of their own, where a ship found sailing itself was a portent of unimaginable horror. Among the most enduring of these maritime mysteries is a 14th-century precursor to the famous Mary Celeste, a vessel discovered under circumstances so strange it fueled centuries of superstition. Though no single case has a name as iconic as that 19th-century brigantine, chronicles from the period are filled with accounts of ships found adrift, fully provisioned and utterly abandoned, their crews vanished without a trace. These floating engineers became known as ghost ships, and in an age of limited navigation and boundless imagination, their silent arrival in port was enough to spark rumors of sea monsters, demonic abductions, and divine curses. One such account, recorded by maritime chroniclers, tells of a merchant cog found drifting in the North Sea sometime in the late 1300s. A fishing vessel spotted it, its sails still set but hanging limp in a dead calm, its hull riding low but not taking on water. After hailing it and receiving no response, a boarding party was sent over. They found a scene of profound and unsettling normality. The cargo of wool and timber was perfectly secure and untouched. A meal, now spoiled and covered in mold, was set out on the table in the captain's cabin. The crew's personal belongings were still in their quarters, and even the ship's cat was found asleep on a coil of rope. But of the captain and his men there was no sign. No lifeboat was missing, no logs indicated a mutiny or distress, and there was no evidence of violence or a struggle. It was as if the entire crew had simply been plucked from the deck by an invisible hand and carried off into the sky or the sea. In the absence of facts, the human mind, then as now, rushes to fill the void with narrative. For the deeply superstitious sailors of the Middle Ages, the explanation for such a disappearance was rarely mundane. The most common and feared culprit was the kraken, a legendary sea monster of enormous proportions said to dwell off the coasts of Norway and Greenland. Medieval maps often illustrated these uncharted waters with illustrations of gigantic, tentacled beasts capable of dragging an entire ship and its crew down to a watery grave in an instant. The discovery of a vessel with no crew and no signs of an attack could easily be interpreted as the work of such a creature. Perhaps it had attacked so swiftly that the men had no time to fight back, or maybe its mere appearance was so terrifying that the sailors, in a fit of madness, had leaped overboard to escape it. Other supernatural explanations pointed to the devil himself or his lesser demons. Sailors were a devout bunch, living at the mercy of an element they could not control, and many saw the ocean as a literal playground for malignant spirits. A ghost ship might be seen as a vessel cursed for some sin committed by its captain, perhaps carrying a blasphemer or a stolen religious relic. The crew could have been carried off by demons as punishment, leaving the ship as a warning to others. There were also tales of phantom ships, not made of wood at all, but illusions cast by evil spirits to lure vessels off course and onto the rocks. The Flying Dutchman legend, though crystallized in later centuries, has its roots in this very medieval fear of a spectral ship doomed to sail forever, its crew neither living nor dead. Yet, if we pull back from the realm of myth, several plausible, natural explanations emerge for these medieval mysteries. The most likely culprit was often the weather. A sudden, catastrophic microburst or waterspout could have struck the ship without warning. Such an event could have washed every single man overboard in seconds, leaving the structurally sound vessel to drift away. Another compelling theory involves harmful algal blooms, often called red tides. Certain species of algae release potent neurotoxins into the air that can cause hallucinations, paralysis, and respiratory failure in humans. A ship sailing through a dense bloom could have been enveloped in a toxic mist, driving the crew to madness and causing them to jump into the sea or killing them outright. The ship, once the air cleared, would be left floating as a tomb for its poisoned crew. Piracy and treachery also offer grimly human explanations. It was not unheard of for a crew to mutiny, kill their captain, and then abandon the ship in the longboat to escape justice, perhaps to start new lives elsewhere. Alternatively, a ship could have been attacked by pirates who, after taking any valuable cargo and conscripting or executing the crew, simply set the vessel adrift. Without any survivors to tell the tale, the event would vanish into history, leaving only the empty hull behind. The true terror of the medieval ghost ship was not necessarily a monster, but the silence. It was a blank space on the map of understanding, a story without an ending that forced everyone who heard it to confront the immense and terrifying power of the sea and the fragile vulnerability of those who dared to cross it. While the nightmare in Strasbourg remains the most famous and well-documented case, it was far from an isolated event. The phenomenon of dancing mania, which medieval chroniclers sometimes called St. Vitus's dance or St. John's dance, erupted in scattered outbreaks across Europe for centuries, a bizarre and terrifying contagion of the mind that seemed to leap from community to community. In 1374, dozens of people in the German town of Aachen were seized by the same compulsive urge, dancing uncontrollably in the streets for weeks on end. The mania spread from there to other towns in the Netherlands and Belgium, following the trade routes of the Rhine River, as if the very idea of the dance was a pathogen hitching a ride on the carts and boats of merchants. Another significant outbreak occurred in 1491 in the Alsatian city of Strasbourg itself, decades before the more famous event, suggesting a recurring pattern of psychological fragility in a region often caught between warring feudal lords and the constant threat of famine. Faced with an affliction that defied all physical explanation, the religious authorities of the time responded with the only tools their worldview allowed: spiritual warfare. Many clergy interpreted the dancing as a clear case of demonic possession or a collective curse from a wrathful saint. The prescribed cures were often as extreme as the condition itself. In some towns, priests performed mass exorcisms, chanting prayers and sprinkling holy water over the writhing, exhausted bodies of the afflicted. Participants were often taken to chapels dedicated to St. Vitus, where they were forced to dance around his statue in a desperate attempt to appease him. In more severe cases, the response turned violent and punitive. Some community leaders, believing they were dealing with witches or heretics, resorted to flogging the dancers to drive out the evil spirits, a brutal attempt to shock the body out of its trance that only added physical trauma to the existing psychological torment. Modern medicine offers a far more nuanced and compassionate explanation for these events, viewing them through the lens of mass psychogenic illness, also known as mass hysteria. This is a phenomenon where psychological distress manifests as physical symptoms in a large group of people, often spreading rapidly through a community under intense shared stress. The key ingredients are a pre-existing state of acute anxiety, often caused by poverty, war, or disease, and a belief system that provides a framework for the symptoms to take hold. In the deeply religious and superstitious Middle Ages, the concept of a saint's curse or demonic influence provided that exact framework. The involuntary movements, the tremors, the feeling of burning skin, all classic symptoms of extreme psychological distress were interpreted through that lens and thus became a dancing plague. The social contagion aspect cannot be overstated. In a tightly knit medieval community, seeing a neighbor or family member gripped by such a powerful compulsion could trigger a powerful sympathetic response in others, a psychological domino effect where the suggestion of illness becomes the illness itself. This is especially potent in situations of powerlessness. For a peasantry with no control over crop failures or the whims of their lords, the dancing mania offered a bizarre form of agency, a way for the body to physically express the collective despair and anxiety that could not be voiced. It was a cry for help written not in words but in frantic, uncontrollable motion. From a modern perspective, these outbreaks were not supernatural punishments but tragic sociological events, the human mind's extreme reaction to a world that felt increasingly hostile and unpredictable. The story of the Green Children did not end with the girls' assimilation into Suffolk society. Instead, it began a remarkable journey of its own, evolving from a local curiosity into a powerful piece of cultural folklore that has resonated for nearly a millennium. The village of Woolpit itself embraced the tale, weaving it into the very fabric of its identity. For generations, the story was a point of local pride, a strange and wonderful anomaly that set their home apart. The name Woolpit became inextricably linked not just to wolf traps but to a gateway of another world. Local inns and pubs might have toasted the tale, and the landscape itself gained a new layer of meaning. A certain field or ancient path could be pointed to as the very spot where the otherworldly visitors were discovered, blurring the line between history and legend for the people who lived there. This rich soil of local tradition provided the perfect ground for the story to be transplanted into the world of literature. The tale's first chroniclers, Ralph of Coggeshall and William of Newburgh, were not mere gossip mongers, they were serious historians of their day. By choosing to include the account in their scholarly works, they granted it a legitimacy that allowed it to survive the centuries while other folktales faded away. In the modern era, the story has been retold and reimagined countless times. It has inspired poetry, most notably by the Suffolk poet Robert Crosbie, and forms the basis for novels like John Macklin's The Green Children and children's literature that simplifies the mystery for younger audiences. Each retelling adds a new shade of interpretation, some focusing on the poignant tragedy of the boy who died, others on the girl's struggle to adapt to a strange new world, cementing its status as a timeless narrative about belonging and the other. Perhaps the most fascinating evolution of the Woolpit mystery is its adoption by the UFO and extraterrestrial hypothesis community in the 20th and 21st centuries. To a modern audience steeped in science fiction, the story reads like a classic case file. The green skin, a possible description of aliens with chlorophyllic or copper-based blood, or perhaps simply the effect of wearing a pressurized suit or coming from a world with a different atmosphere. The unusual clothing, obviously a non-terrestrial fabrication, the unknown language clearly not of this earth, the description of a land of perpetual twilight. A planet orbiting a distant, dim red dwarf star, tidally locked so one side always faces its sun, or a world deep within a cloud-shrouded system. The children's sudden appearance and disorientation. A malfunctioning teleportation device or a crashed spacecraft, with the loud noise they described being the sound of the vessel or its engine. In this framework, the wolf pit isn't just a trap, it's a crash site, and the entire account becomes one of the earliest and most compelling pieces of evidence for ancient alien contact. This reinterpretation highlights a profound truth about how we process mystery. In the 12th century, the framework for understanding was spiritual and folkloric. The unknown land was St. Martin's Land, perhaps a Christianized version of the Celtic otherworld or a pagan underworld. The green color could symbolize fairy folk, often depicted with unusual hues in Celtic mythology, or it could be a sign of their otherworldly nature. The medieval mind used the vocabulary it had, saints, demons, and fairies. The modern mind, having largely dismissed those explanations, uses a new vocabulary, extraterrestrials, spacecraft, and alternate dimensions. The human need to explain the inexplicable remains constant, only the mythology changes. The Green Children are a perfect Rorschach test for the era interpreting them, reflecting our deepest anxieties and wonders about what else might be out there. Ultimately, the enduring power of the Woolpit story lies in its beautiful, frustrating ambiguity. It is just detailed enough to feel credible, yet just vague enough to resist any single definitive solution. It sits perfectly at the intersection of history, folklore, and mystery, allowing each generation to project its own fears and fantasies onto it. The tale invites us to wonder, to imagine not just what happened, but what it means about our own world. It asks if the boundaries of reality are as fixed as we believe, and reminds us that the most enduring mysteries are not those that are solved, but those that continue to inspire questions, debate, and a sense of wonder centuries after they first emerged from the dark earth of a forgotten wolf pit. For centuries, the Voynich Manuscript's greatest secret was not the meaning of its text, but its very age. Wild speculation placed its creation anywhere from the 13th to the 17th century, with attributions ranging from Roger Bacon to an elaborate Renaissance hoax. This fundamental question was finally put to rest in 2011, when a team of researchers at the University of Arizona performed radiocarbon dating on several tiny vellum samples. The results were stunningly precise. The vellum was manufactured between 1404 and 1430. This firmly planted the book's creation in the early 15th century, ruling out later hoaxes and confirming its status as a genuine and genuinely bizarre medieval artifact. This discovery, however, only deepened the core mystery. We now knew when it was made, but we were no closer to understanding why or by whom. In the 21st century, the baton was passed from human cryptographers to artificial intelligence, the most powerful tool ever devised for pattern recognition. In 2018, a team of computer scientists from the University of Alberta and a researcher from the University of Tübingen applied advanced AI algorithms to the manuscript. Their AI was not trained to understand language, but to identify its underlying structure. It analyzed the text to determine its pattern, comparing it to the translated opening passages of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights in 380 different languages. The results were both electrifying and frustrating. The AI's analysis strongly suggested that the Voynich script was not a random cipher but a real language with patterns consistent with a natural tongue. It even speculated that the language was most likely Hebrew or Arabic in structure. Emboldened by this, the researchers then attempted to use their model to decode the manuscript's first sentence. The AI proposed a translation suggesting the opening words read, "She made recommendations to the priest, man of the house, and me and people." It was a grammatical, if somewhat clunky, sentence, but it was immediately met with intense skepticism from the academic community. The method was controversial, and without a consistent, verifiable translation of entire sections, this AI-generated decoding remains an intriguing but unproven hypothesis. Other technological approaches have focused on the book's physical composition, yielding fascinating insights into its creation. Multispectral imaging has been used to analyze the ink and pigments, revealing that the text and illustrations were almost certainly applied in a single pass, suggesting one incredibly dedicated author-artist rather than a team of collaborators. The ink itself offers another clue. It is a common iron gall ink, the standard writing fluid of the period. This is a crucial detail. If the text were a meaningless hoax, one might expect the author to use a cheap, simple ink. The use of standard ink, combined with the immense cost and effort of preparing hundreds of pages of high-quality vellum, argues against a casual forgery. This was a significant, expensive project undertaken by someone with substantial resources and a powerful motivation that we simply cannot discern. So why does the Voynich manuscript continue to defy our most advanced technology? The answer lies in the fundamental nature of the problem. Artificial intelligence excels at finding patterns in data, but it requires a ground truth to validate its findings, a known example to confirm its guesses. With the Voynich, there is no ground truth, there is no parallel text, no Rosetta Stone to provide a key. An AI can propose a structure, but it cannot tell us if that structure is correct. It can only tell us what is statistically probable. Without a single verified word to anchor the translation, every AI-generated solution floats in a sea of possibility, unable to be proven or disproven. It is the ultimate locked room mystery, and we are still searching for the key that simply isn't in the room with us. The enduring enigma of the Voynich Manuscript forces us to confront the limits of our own knowledge and the possibility of a closed epistemic loop. It is entirely possible that the key, the cipher book, the author's notes, the cultural context that made sense of it all has been lost to time. The knowledge required to understand it may have existed only in a single mind or within a tiny, secretive community whose secrets died with them. We may be forever on the outside of a joke we cannot hear, admiring the artwork of a cosmology we can never comprehend. In this light, the Voynich is not just a puzzle to be solved, but a profound and humbling monument to the fragility of knowledge itself, a beautiful, silent echo from a past that has chosen to keep its most fascinating secret. Yet, even as the last Grand Master's ashes cooled, the story of the Knights Templar was far from over. It was simply moving from the pages of history into the fertile ground of legend, beginning a second, secret life that would prove even more enduring than their first. The official order was dissolved, its members scattered or executed, but the human imagination refused to let them die. Almost immediately, whispers began to circulate across Europe. The king had not captured all of them. Their vast treasure, the very thing Philip IV had craved, had not been found in the Paris temple. This twin void, the missing men, and the missing gold became a vacuum that conspiracy theories rushed to fill, spawning a hidden legacy that continues to captivate us today. The most persistent of these legends claims that a core group of knights, forewarned of the king's treachery, fled France with the order's legendary treasure and its most sacred relics. But where could they have gone? One of the most popular theories points to Scotland. In 1314, the very year Jacques de Molay was executed, Scotland was fighting for its independence from England. King Robert the Bruce was under excommunication from the same pope who had dissolved the Templars, making Scotland a safe harbor for other enemies of the Church. It is speculated that Templar knights, perhaps even with their fleet, sailed to Scotland and fought alongside Bruce at the pivotal Battle of Bannockburn, turning the tide of the war. Their reward was sanctuary and the ability to go underground, merging with Scottish guilds of stonemasons to preserve their secrets. This, theorists argue, is the direct origin point of Scottish Rite Freemasonry, with its elaborate rituals, its degrees of initiation, and its symbolism that some believe echoes Templar traditions. This alleged connection forms the bedrock of countless modern myths. Freemasonry, which officially emerged in the early 1700s, does share some superficial similarities with the Templars. Both are fraternal orders with secret rites. Both use architectural symbolism, the Templars in their churches, the Masons in their lodges, and both are often accused of holding esoteric, world-altering secrets. The problem, historians are quick to point out, is that there is no concrete evidence of a direct organizational link. The centuries between the Templars' dissolution and the rise of Freemasonry are a historical blank. The theory relies on a supposed underground survival of the order for 400 years without a single verifiable document to prove it, yet the idea is powerfully seductive. It suggests a continuous, hidden thread of ancient wisdom passed down through the ages, a secret history running parallel to our own. This narrative was explosively popularized in the 20th and 21st centuries, most notably by Dan Brown's novel The Da Vinci Code. Brown's genius was to weave the Templar myth into an even grander conspiracy involving the Holy Grail, the bloodline of Jesus Christ, and a secret society called the Priory of Sion. In this telling, the Templars weren't just bankers and warriors, they were the guardians of the greatest secret in history, and their persecution was a ruthless attempt by the Church to suppress a truth that would shatter its very foundation. The book and film presented these ideas as a tantalizing blend of fact and fiction, leading millions to question what they knew about history, art, and religion. While scholars universally debunked the book's central claims, its impact was undeniable. It transformed the Templars from a medieval curiosity into a global pop culture phenomenon, a byword for ancient mysteries and shadowy cabals. But why does this myth have such incredible staying power? It speaks to a deep and abiding human desire. The idea that history is not a random series of events, but is instead guided by a hidden hand, a secret society with a grand plan, is profoundly comforting. It imposes order on chaos. The Templar conspiracy offers a romantic alternative to the messy, often grim, reality of the past. It replaces a story of a greedy king destroying a powerful bank with an epic, centuries-long shadow war over the soul of truth itself. We see their symbols, the distinctive red cross on a white mantle, everywhere, from the labels of whiskey bottles to the logos of video games, each one a tiny whisper of this alternate history. The Knights Templar are no longer just medieval monks. They have become eternal archetypes, the ultimate secret keepers, forever hiding in plain sight, their true purpose known only to those who know where to look. For centuries, the fate of the princes was a matter of historical documents and informed speculation, a debate confined to dusty archives and academic conferences. But in the 20th and 21st centuries, this medieval cold case collided with a powerful new tool, modern forensic science. The discovery of the children's bones in 1674 had always been compelling, but it was not conclusive evidence. They had been interred in an urn in Westminster Abbey, resting as unnamed casualties of history, their identity accepted but never scientifically proven. The advent of DNA analysis offered a tantalizing opportunity to finally put the question of their identity to rest, to replace theory with genetic fact. However, this scientific ambition quickly became entangled in a complex web of ethical, religious, and practical debates that have, so far, prevented a definitive answer. The most obvious course of action would be to test the bones in the urn. In the 1930s, the remains were actually exhumed and examined by a team of archaeologists and a dentist, who concluded based on the age of the children and the presence of similar dental characteristics that they were indeed the princes. But this was long before the era of DNA. A modern analysis could potentially compare their genetic material to the proven remains of other Plantagenets. The perfect opportunity seemed to arise in 2012, with the incredible discovery of the lost grave of King Richard III himself beneath a car park in Leicester. His skeleton was exhumed and subjected to a full battery of tests, including a full mitochondrial DNA sequence extracted from his bones. This created a benchmark, a genetic key that could, in theory, be used to test the Westminster bones. If the princes were his nephews, they would share a specific mitochondrial DNA lineage through their shared grandmother. Yet, obtaining permission to test the Westminster remains has proven to be an insurmountable hurdle. The Dean of Westminster has consistently refused all requests for DNA testing, citing a profound ethical duty to let the dead rest in peace. The Abbey is an active place of worship and a royal peculiar, meaning it operates under the direct jurisdiction of the monarch. Disturbing a royal burial, especially of children who died under such tragic circumstances, is seen as a deeply disrespectful act. There is also a legitimate concern about the destructive nature of the testing. Obtaining a viable DNA sample would require damaging the ancient bones, and there is no guarantee of success after so many centuries. For the Church, the spiritual sanctity of the tomb outweighs the historical curiosity of solving the mystery. This has led researchers to pursue an alternative, ingenious but ethically fraught path, testing the descendants of the prince's relatives. The mitochondrial DNA line that would be shared by the princes and Richard III is passed down through the female line. This means that any direct maternal line descendant of the prince's grandmother, Cecily Neville, could provide a living DNA sample for comparison. Researchers have reportedly identified such potential living descendants in Canada and New Zealand, distant cousins separated by centuries but still connected by that unbroken genetic thread. The idea would be to compare their DNA with that of the Westminster bones, if they were ever tested, or even to use it to identify other potential remains that might be discovered. However, this approach raises its own set of modern ethical dilemmas around genetic privacy and the consent of individuals who may have no interest in being drawn into a 500-year-old royal drama. The entire debate forces us to confront a difficult question. Do we have the right to exhume the past, literally and figuratively, for answers? Proponents of testing argue that the historical truth is paramount. Solving this mystery would not only close one of history's greatest whodunits, but could also lead to a significant reassessment of Richard III's character and the entire Tudor narrative that succeeded him. The truth, they argue, belongs to the world. Opponents counter that some mysteries are meant to stay buried, that the pursuit of knowledge must be balanced with respect for the dead and for the traditions of institutions like the Church. They also point out that even a successful DNA test would not actually solve the murder mystery. It would only confirm the identity of the victims. It could tell us who was in the urn, but it could never tell us who put them there. The DNA might confirm the presence of the princes, but it would be silent on the orders of Richard III, Henry VII, or the Duke of Buckingham. This intersection of science and history is a fascinating new frontier, but it is one filled with ambiguity. The Princes in the Tower case stands as the ultimate example of how technology can bring us to the very brink of an answer, only for human considerations to hold us back. The bones in Westminster Abbey are perhaps the most studied yet untested evidence in history, a secret locked in a sacred box that we have the key to open, but perhaps not the will. For now, the mystery endures, suspended between the certainties of science and the complexities of faith, ethics, and tradition, a ghost at the feast of historical inquiry that continues to haunt us from the shadows of the past. The bizarre trail left across the Devonshire snow did not simply vanish with the morning sun. Instead, it etched itself deeply into the cultural imagination, evolving from a local panic into a foundational piece of Victorian folklore. In an era captivated by the twin engines of scientific progress and spiritual unease, the Devil's Footprints provided the perfect raw material for a new kind of story, the supernatural mystery tale. Authors like Joseph Sheridan Le Fanu and later Arthur Conan Doyle, though not writing about the event directly, captured its essence in stories where the rational world was breached by the inexplicable, where evidence of the paranormal was left behind for a bewildered modern man to discover. The Footprints became a prototype for countless fictional accounts of spectral visitors and infernal trespass, a real-world event that proved truth could be stranger than the most fantastic fiction. This Victorian reinterpretation did something crucial. It actively reached back into the past to weave the event into a much older tapestry of belief. Journalists and writers of the time, seeking to make sense of the incident, instinctively linked it to medieval chronicles of demonic activity. They pointed to old parish records that told of cloven hoof prints found burned into the stones of churches after a supposed demonic visitation, or to folk tales where the devil was said to leave a trail of scorched earth wherever he walked. By doing this, the Victorians were not just telling a ghost story. They were framing the Devon event as the latest chapter in a timeless, ongoing conflict between the holy and the infernal, connecting their own modern, industrial age to the superstitious heart of the Middle Ages. The incident was transformed from a bizarre weather anomaly into a timeless myth, suggesting that the devil had not been banished by the light of science, but was still roaming the English countryside just as he had always been. This process reveals a profound truth about how humanity processes the unexplained. We are storytellers by nature, and when faced with a mystery that defies logical explanation, we instinctively shape it into a narrative that fits our existing worldview. For the medieval peasant, a strange light in the sky was a dragon or an angel because that was the vocabulary available to them. For the Victorian, the same event might be a ghostly apparition or, with the advent of new technology, an extraterrestrial spacecraft. The framework changes, but the underlying impulse remains constant: to name the unnameable and to understand the incomprehensible by clothing it in a familiar story. The Devil's Footprints serve as a powerful bridge between these eras, demonstrating that the need for myth is not a relic of a benighted past, but a continuous thread in the human experience. Ultimately, the enduring power of such mysteries lies in their beautiful ambiguity. A solved mystery has an ending; it becomes a footnote in a history book. But an unsolved mystery, like the one in Devon, remains an open question. It belongs to everyone and no one, a blank canvas upon which each generation can project its own fears, its own science, and its own myths. It allows the rationalist to dream of experimental balloons and the romantic to shudder at the thought of a midnight stroll by the Prince of Darkness. This ability to live in two worlds at once, the world of fact and the world of legend, is what grants these events their immortality. They are not just puzzles to be solved, but perpetual wellsprings of wonder, reminding us that no matter how much we map the world, there will always be room for one more mark in the snow, one more story waiting to be told. But how does a treasure torn from its home and cast into the violent currents of history find its way back into the light? The journey of the Lindisfarne Gospels from a Viking raider's spoil to a protected cultural icon is a story of quiet dedication. A centuries-long rescue mission carried out not by kings or armies, but by generations of guardians who recognized its value. After being ripped from its spiritual home in 793, the book entered a shadowy period of exile. Its path is lost to official records, but we can imagine its journey through the hands of Norse traders, perhaps kept as a curiosity for its splendid cover before being sold or traded. It likely spent centuries in relative obscurity, possibly within a private collection or even a different monastic library that had managed to acquire it. Its true origin forgotten, but its physical form carefully, if unknowingly, preserved. The turning point in its modern recovery began with the passion of antiquarians, the voracious collectors of the 17th and 18th centuries who saw in old manuscripts not just spiritual texts, but windows into the national past. The most famous of these was Sir Robert Cotton, a man whose bibliographic obsession would become the foundation of the British nation's memory. His library, a magnificent and chaotic collection stuffed into rooms organized by the busts of Roman emperors, was a sanctuary for England's most precious documents. It was here that the Lindisfarne Gospels finally resurfaced, carefully catalogued and safeguarded. Cotton and his fellow collectors were not merely hoarders, they were pioneers of preservation, recognizing that these ancient books were irreplaceable artifacts of history and art, worthy of study and protection for their own sake, a secular form of devotion that ensured their survival when many monastic libraries were being dissolved and scattered. This salvation, however, would have been impossible without the staggering devotion of the medieval scribes who created the book in the first place. The recovery of the Gospels is not just about its physical return, it is about the recovery of its meaning, and that meaning is encoded in the immense labor of its maker, believed to be a single monk named Eadfrith. Imagine the task he set for himself. Every page of the 259 folios is a masterpiece of precision. The intricate carpet pages, with their endlessly complex knots and spirals, were not drawn but painstakingly planned and inked with a feather quill, using pigments ground from minerals and plants, some imported from the distant Mediterranean. The text itself is a model of calligraphic perfection. This was not a job, it was a lifelong act of worship, a physical prayer that may have taken him 30 years to complete. His skill created an object so inherently valuable, so radiant with sacred purpose and artistic genius, that even across centuries and changes of ownership, its power commanded respect and ensured its care. Today, this incredible journey culminates in its display at the British Library in London, where it is presented not merely as an old book but as a profound cultural treasure. It is displayed under controlled lighting in a secure case, a far cry from the candlelit chapel of Lindisfarne, yet the intent is the same: to inspire awe. Visitors can now appreciate details impossible to see in the medieval period: the microscopic precision of the interlace, the stunning vibrancy of the colors that have survived over 13 centuries. The library uses digital technology to allow virtual turning of its pages, making this deeply spiritual object accessible to a global audience. It stands as a testament to the resilience of human creativity, a direct line back to a brilliant mind on a windswept island over 1,000 years ago. Its journey from a Viking longship to a climate-controlled display case is a powerful narrative of loss and recovery, a reminder that the greatest treasures of our world are not those made of gold, but those made of ideas, faith, and incomparable artistry preserved against all odds. Yet from the ashes of this unimaginable suffering, one of history's most profound and counterintuitive paradoxes emerged. The Black Death, for all its horrors, became the unlikely catalyst for a dramatic improvement in the lives of the very poorest in society. It's a chilling reminder that history's silver linings are often woven from the darkest threads. For centuries, the feudal system had been a rigid, unyielding structure, a pyramid with a vast base of serfs supporting a tiny apex of nobility. A serf was legally bound to the land they worked, owing their lord a portion of their crops and, more crucially, their labor. They couldn't leave their village, seek better wages, or negotiate for better conditions. Their lives were ones of subsistence and subservience, with little hope for upward mobility. The entire medieval economy was built on this foundation of cheap, abundant, and utterly disposable labor. The plague shattered this system at its core. When a third to a half of the entire population vanished within a few short years, the economic law of supply and demand was applied with brutal Malthusian force. Only this time, it was the supply of labor that had catastrophically dwindled while the demand for it remained. Fields still needed to be plowed, harvests gathered, and goods transported. Suddenly, the surviving peasants found themselves in a position of power they had never known and could scarcely have imagined. For the first time, their labor was a scarce and valuable commodity. Landowners, desperate to have their fields worked and their incomes preserved, were forced to compete for workers. This led to a spectacular and unprecedented rise in wages across the board. Historical records from England show that the daily wage for an agricultural laborer effectively doubled in the decades following the plague. This wasn't just a slight pay raise, it was a tectonic shift in economic reality, but the changes went far beyond mere wages. The old feudal obligations, the very heart of serfdom, began to rapidly unravel. Lords were forced to offer incredible incentives to attract and keep workers. They began commuting labor services into cash rents, meaning a peasant could pay a fixed fee instead of being forced to work on the lord's personal land for free. This gave them more time to work their own plots for profit. Some landlords offered lower rents, longer leases, and even special bonuses for a family to settle on their land. The concept of personal freedom itself became a bargaining chip. Many serfs negotiated their outright manumission, buying their freedom or having it granted in exchange for staying to work the land. The oppressive weight of feudalism, which had pressed down on generations, was suddenly and irrevocably lightened. This newfound economic power did not go unchallenged by the stunned aristocracy. The ruling class watched this social inversion with a mixture of horror and indignation. They tried desperately to turn back the clock through legislation. In England, the government passed the Statute of Labourers in 1351, a law that explicitly attempted to freeze wages at their pre-plague levels and forbid labourers from moving to find better employment. It was a blatant attempt to use the force of law to override the forces of the market, but these statutes were largely unenforceable. The economic pressure was simply too great. Landowners who needed to harvest their crops would secretly offer higher wages than their neighbors, undermining the law at every turn. The authorities couldn't arrest half the population, and the constant evasion of these laws revealed the stunning new weakness of the medieval state and the traditional landed elite. The inevitable result of this top-down resistance was widespread social unrest. The peasants, now tasting a better life and possessing the economic leverage to secure it, were no longer willing to meekly accept a return to the old ways. This simmering discontent eventually boiled over into open rebellion. The most famous of these uprisings was the English Peasants' Revolt of 1381. Led by figures like Wat Tyler, a massive army of commoners marched on London, demanding the abolition of serfdom, the removal of oppressive officials, and fair economic treatment. While the revolt was ultimately crushed and its leaders executed, its sheer occurrence sent a shockwave through the establishment. The ruling class realized it could no longer take the obedience of the lower orders for granted. The genie of social mobility was out of the bottle, and though progress would be slow and fraught with conflict, there was no putting it back. The long-term consequences reshaped Europe. The collapse of the manorial system and the rise of a wage-based economy accelerated the decline of feudalism and paved the way for the eerie Chinese letter of capitalism. With more money in their pockets, common people could become consumers, stimulating trade and the growth of a more diverse economy. The psychological impact was just as profound. The plague had demonstrated that the established order was not divinely ordained and unchangeable. It could be broken by forces beyond anyone's control, and in the aftermath it could be reshaped by human action. This erosion of blind faith in authority and tradition would eventually contribute to the critical, questioning spirit of the Renaissance and the Reformation. The world had ended, and from its ruins the survivors built something new, something that to a serf living before 1347 would have seemed like an absolute economic miracle. But even as societies began to rebuild from the ashes of the plague, the human experience remained punctuated by phenomena that defied any rational understanding, echoing fears and wonders that transcended the centuries. While our next mystery is a modern one, its roots dig deep into a very medieval way of perceiving the world, a world where unexplained sounds were never just sounds but messages, warnings, or portents. In the early 1990s, in the beautiful high desert town of Taos, New Mexico, a strange and persistent complaint began to emerge. A small portion of the town's residents started hearing a low, relentless, rumbling hum. It was described as a distant diesel engine idling, a deep vibration that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. This was the Taos hum, an infrasound phenomenon that has been heard by a consistent 2% of the population, a select group of people whose ears are attuned to a frequency that for others is simply silence. What makes the Taos hum so baffling is its selectivity. Not everyone can hear it. For those who can, it's often a source of immense distress, causing sleepless nights, headaches, and a feeling of maddening isolation, as they are plagued by a noise no one else believes is there. Scientific investigations have been launched, with teams from prestigious universities and government agencies descending on Taos with sophisticated listening equipment. Yet every time they have come up empty. No definitive source for the sound has ever been recorded or identified. Theories have ranged from the mundane to the extraordinary underground geological activity, secret military communication systems, electromagnetic radiation, or even the collective hum of industrial equipment from far away, focused and amplified by the unique atmospheric conditions of the desert bowl Taos sits in. But without a verifiable source, the hum remains an enigma, a sensory experience without a cause. This modern mystery finds a powerful and eerie resonance when we look back through medieval chronicles. In an age without the constant industrial din of our modern world, the auditory landscape was very different. Unexplained sounds stood out with terrifying clarity, and were almost universally interpreted through a spiritual or superstitious lens. Chroniclers wrote of aerial battles heard over England, with the clashing of swords and cries of phantom armies echoing from the skies, sounds we might now attribute to rare atmospheric acoustics or seismic activity, but which were then seen as clear omens of coming war or divine judgment. The sudden, violent boom of a meteorite exploding in the atmosphere, a phenomenon we call a bolide, was recorded as the dragon's roar, a sure sign of God's wrath. Church bells were believed to ring on their own to warn of impending disaster, and the howling of the wind through a ruin could be interpreted as the screams of trapped souls in purgatory. In the medieval worldview, there was no such thing as a meaningless sound. The universe was a place of constant divine communication, and any auditory anomaly was a message to be decoded. A mysterious hum might be the sound of the earth itself groaning under the weight of human sin, or the distant choir of angels, or the grinding machinery of the universe that was only audible in moments of heightened spiritual awareness. For those who heard these things, it was not a scientific curiosity. It was a deeply personal, often terrifying encounter with the unknown. They were living in a world that spoke to them, and the message was often one of warning. The Tao's hum and these medieval accounts are connected by more than just the shared experience of strange noise. They are linked by the profound human need to find meaning in sensation. Where science has so far failed to provide a concrete answer for the residents of Taos, the mind seeks its own explanations, often venturing into the realm of conspiracy or the paranormal. This is the same cognitive process that led a medieval farmer to interpret a peculiar rumble as a sign from heaven. The key difference is the framework for belief. Today, we seek a technological or geological culprit, a secret government project, or a unique fault line. In the Middle Ages, they sought a theological one. Both are attempts to rationalize the irrational, to place a comforting label on a deeply unsettling experience that exists just beyond the edge of understanding. This enduring phenomenon challenges the very line we draw between the objective world and our subjective perception of it. The Tao's hum is real to those who hear it, just as the aerial battles were real to those who recorded them. Whether the source is ultimately found to be a unique form of tinnitus, a geological vibration, or something else entirely, its power lies in its mystery. It reminds us that even in our hyper-connected, scientifically mapped world, there are still experiences that isolate us, that whisper just beyond the range of common perception, and that connect us across centuries to an ancient human truth. Sometimes the world makes a noise and we are simply left to wonder what it means. The legend of the lost library is far more than a simple treasure hunt. It has become a powerful national myth, deeply intertwined with the very identity of Russia itself. This narrative offers a compelling origin story, one that positions Russia not as a peripheral northern power, but as the direct and legitimate heir to the grandeur of the Roman and Byzantine empires. By claiming to possess the lost wisdom of Constantinople, the myth bestows upon Russia a classical pedigree and a cultural preeminence that rivals and perhaps even surpasses that of Western Europe. It transforms the marriage of Ivan III and Sophia Paleolog from a political alliance into a moment of profound cultural transmission, a symbolic passing of the torch from the Second Rome to the Third Rome, with Moscow as the rightful guardian of civilization's greatest treasures. This idea fuels a form of cultural nationalism, providing a deep historical justification for Russia's sense of destiny and its place at the center of world history, a narrative that has been embraced and promoted by figures from the Tsars to modern political leaders. This potent national story has directly inspired numerous official and unofficial expeditions, each driven by the dream of securing this ultimate cultural trophy. The quest began in earnest with Tsar Peter the Great, who ordered systematic excavations beneath the Moscow Kremlin, convinced that the library was the key to cementing Russia's status as a modern, enlightened empire. The search reached a fever pitch in the 1930s under Joseph Stalin, a leader obsessed with symbols of power and historical legitimacy. As workers dug the foundations for the Moscow metro, Stalin's secret police, the NKVD, operated a clandestine division specifically tasked with investigating the library's whereabouts. For Stalin, finding the library would have been a monumental propaganda victory, a tangible symbol that the Soviet Union was the true culmination of human history, inheriting the mantle from both the Tsars and the ancient world. Even in the modern era, the hunt continues with well-funded private initiatives and academic groups employing ground-penetrating radar and seismic sensors to map the labyrinth of unexplored tunnels and chambers that still lie beneath the ancient streets of the capital. Ultimately, the enduring power of such legends lies not in their factual truth, but in their function as foundational myths. A nation's identity is built not just on verifiable history, but on the stories it tells about itself, the shared narratives that provide meaning, purpose, and a sense of continuity. The Lost Library of the Tsars is Russia's version of King Arthur's Camelot or El Dorado. It is a mirror reflecting the nation's deepest aspirations for wisdom, power, and global respect. The constant, fruitless search for the library is, in a way, more important than ever finding it. The mystery itself keeps the myth alive, allowing each generation to project its own hopes and ideals onto the story. It represents an eternal becoming, a promise of a glorious past that validates a destined future. This is why such legends are cornerstones of cultural heritage. They are not about discovering gold, but about discovering who we are and who we believe we are meant to be. The library, real or not, has already found its home in the soul of a nation forever captivated by the idea of its own secret, magnificent destiny. But the story of the ancestral Pueblones does not end with empty cliff dwellings. Their legacy echoes powerfully in the vibrant cultures that emerged from their diaspora. The modern Pueblo peoples, including the Hopi, Zuni, and the communities along the Rio Grande, are the direct descendants of those who walked away from Mesa Verde and Chaco Canyon. Their rich oral histories are not myth, but a living, breathing chronicle that preserves the memory of that great migration and the lessons learned from the collapse. For these communities, the term Anasazi, a Navajo word often translated as ancient enemies, is problematic. They prefer Hisatsinam, a Hopi word meaning the people of long ago, a term of reverence that acknowledges a direct ancestral connection, not a mysterious, vanished race. These oral traditions are filled with stories that archaeologists recognize as metaphorical accounts of the historical events that unfolded. There are tales of a great drought, of villages torn apart by conflict, and of a sacred covenant to seek a new home, a center place where they could live in balance with the world. The Hopi speak of their clans migrating for generations, guided by spiritual signs before converging on their three mesas in Arizona. These stories are not mere folklore. They are a sophisticated historical record passed down through countless generations, preserving the profound trauma and the ultimate resilience of a people who chose cultural survival over a doomed existence in a dying land. They serve as a continuous reminder of where they came from and the hard-won wisdom that ensured their survival. This deep historical memory also transforms the Anasazi disappearance into one of history's most potent cautionary tales. In the medieval world, their collapse was not an isolated incident but part of a global pattern where sophisticated societies buckled under environmental pressure. We see a parallel in the fate of the Norse Greenlanders, another medieval society that clung to an unsustainable way of life until it was too late. Both cultures faced a rapidly changing climate, the ancestral Pueblones with a megadrought, the Norse with the Little Ice Age. Both faced external threats and resource scarcity, but the critical difference and the ultimate lesson lies in their response. The ancestral Pueblones, though undoubtedly suffering greatly, demonstrated a breathtaking cultural flexibility. They abandoned their monumental architecture, their political hierarchy, and their old settlements. they dispersed, adapted, and ultimately reinvented themselves, weaving their old beliefs into new social fabrics in new lands. Their disappearance was, in fact, a transformation. The Norse Greenlanders, by contrast, exhibited a fatal inflexibility. Their identity was inextricably tied to being European Christians. They continued to raise dairy cattle even as the pastures failed, built stone churches in the Gothic style, and wore woolen clothing unsuitable for the Arctic cold, all while refusing to adopt the successful hunting technologies and skin garments of the thriving Inuit people who shared their world. They chose cultural purity over practical survival, and they vanished because of it. The story of the ancestral Puebloans teaches us that resilience is not about stubbornly maintaining a status quo, but about the ability to change, to let old forms die so that the people and their culture can live on in a new way. In today's world, facing our own impending environmental crises, their story is more relevant than ever. It is a haunting reminder from the medieval world that no civilization, no matter how grand its buildings or how complex its society, is immune to the forces of nature. But it is also a message of hope, showing that the end of one world can be the beginning of another, and that the greatest strength a culture can possess is the wisdom to know when to hold on, and the courage to know when to let go and move forward. Perhaps no medieval ruler understood the power of myth more than Frederick II, but the legends surrounding him truly ignited not during his life but in the centuries following his death. While his physical body was interred in Palermo, a very different story began to circulate across the German and Italian countryside, one that refused to let the emperor rest. This was the legend of the Kyffhäuser, a powerful folk belief that Frederick was not truly dead, but merely sleeping within a hidden mountain cavern waiting for his destined return. According to the tale, he sits at a stone table, his long red beard having grown so immense that it has curled around the table's legs. He is in a magical slumber, but when the time is right, when the ravens cease to fly around the mountain and the empire faces its darkest hour, he will awaken. He will then rise, shatter the table with his fist, and return to lead a restored Holy Roman Empire to a new golden age, vanquishing its enemies and bringing everlasting peace. This messianic narrative, known as the sleeping hero myth, is a powerful archetype found in cultures worldwide, from the British King Arthur to the Welsh Owain Lorgach. For a populace enduring the chaos and instability that often followed the death of a strong ruler, the idea that their savior was merely waiting in the wings provided immense comfort and hope. It transformed Frederick from a flawed, historical figure into a flawless, mythical symbol of national redemption. The political utility of this legend was immense. Various emperors and nationalist movements in later centuries would invoke the Kyffhäuser myth, linking themselves to Frederick's prophesied return to bolster their own legitimacy and inspire patriotic fervor, proving that a well-crafted legend could be a more potent tool of power than any army. This spiritual power was shockingly reinforced decades after his death when his grandson ordered the emperor's tomb opened. The discovery of his seemingly incorrupt body sent a seismic wave through medieval Europe, instantly becoming a physical pawn in the high-stakes game of sacred politics. To his supporters, the Ghibellines, this was nothing less than a divine miracle, a direct sign from God that the Church's excommunication of Frederick had been a terrible mistake. In their eyes, God himself had preserved the emperor's body to proclaim his sanctity and validate his imperial authority against the overreach of the papacy. For his enemies, the Guelphs, the same phenomenon was proof of the exact opposite, a diabolical miracle. They spread whispers that such preservation could only be the work of dark magic, a sign that the devil had saved the body of his greatest servant on earth. Frederick's corpse became a Rorschach test for medieval faith, with everyone seeing in its preserved state the confirmation of their own deepest beliefs about power, sanctity, and divine will. This event highlights a crucial strategy in the medieval ruler's playbook. the deliberate cultivation of mystery and the supernatural to enhance and legitimize power. In an age where authority was believed to be divinely ordained, a ruler's connection to the miraculous was a direct source of political capital. Frederick's son, Manfred, understood this perfectly. He reportedly had his father's rich burial garments cut up and distributed to loyal allies as sacred relics. This act transformed a political leader into a saint-like figure, his very clothing now imbued with perceived holy power. It was a masterstroke, creating a network of obligation and reverence tied directly to the mystique of the deceased emperor. Other rulers employed similar tactics. The Capetian kings of France proudly displayed the supposed miracle-working power of their touch, claiming they could heal scrofula, a disease known as the king's evil. This public demonstration of divine favor was a powerful tool for reinforcing their royal legitimacy. Similarly, the ownership of major religious relics, a saint's skull, a piece of the true cross, was a vital source of a city or kingdom's prestige, drawing pilgrims and signaling that God's favor rested on that place and its rulers. Frederick's incorruption was perhaps the ultimate relic, his entire body serving as a permanent, undeniable testament to his chosen status. The later discovery that his preservation was likely the result of skilled Arabian embalming techniques, a scientific process he would have undoubtedly appreciated, does nothing to diminish the power of the story. It simply adds a final layer of irony to the legend of the wonder of the world, a man whose greatest miracle was, in the end, a brilliant feat of human ingenuity that fooled the world into seeing the hand of God. Modern zoology and forensic science offer a far more grounded, yet still chilling, set of possibilities for the Beast of Gévaudan, moving the mystery from the realm of demons into the complexities of the natural world. The most widely accepted theory among historians is that the beast was not one, but several large wolves, with the panic and sensationalist press of the time weaving their individual attacks into the legend of a single, supernatural monster. France in the mid-18th century had a severe wolf problem. The animals were plentiful and attacks on livestock were common. In rare cases, particularly during harsh winters or when an animal was sick or injured, wolves could indeed turn to hunting humans. A pack of particularly large and aggressive wolves, perhaps led by an experienced, cunning alpha, could account for the high body count and the widespread geographic range of the attacks. The monstrous descriptions could be explained by the terror of eyewitnesses exaggerating the size and features of a normal, albeit large, canis lupus in the heat of a traumatic moment. Other theories propose an animal that was a wolf but not quite. One compelling idea is that the beast was a wolf-dog hybrid. Such an animal would possess the size and strength of a wolf but could lack the species' innate fear of humans, having been partially socialized by people before being cast out or escaping. This would create a uniquely bold and dangerous predator, comfortable operating near villages and capable of seeing humans as viable prey. The physical descriptions of a broad chest, a dog-like head, and a reddish coat could easily match a hybrid, and its abnormal behavior would be a direct result of its confused genetic heritage, making it an outcast in both the wild and domestic worlds. Then there are the more exotic biological candidates. The description of a powerful, hyena-like animal with a striped back has led some to suggest it was, in fact, a striped hyena or a spotted hyena, escaped from a traveling menagerie. A hyena's powerful jaws are certainly capable of the decapitations described, and its unusual appearance to European eyes would explain the witnesses' confusion and terror. Others have floated the idea of a surviving hyenodon, a prehistoric predatory mammal, but this is paleontological fantasy with no evidence. A more plausible, though still speculative, theory points to an oversized European lynx or a particularly large specimens of feral boar, though these don't fully match the predominant descriptions. Ultimately, the true identity of the beast may be less important than what its story reveals about the medieval and early modern relationship with the wilderness. For the peasants of Gévaudan, the forest was not a place of recreation. It was the dark, unknown periphery of their world, a space filled with very real dangers like starvation, bandits, and, yes, predators. The beast became the physical embodiment of all those fears. It was the wilderness itself, personalized and given teeth. Its alleged invulnerability to normal weapons reflected a deep-seated belief that the natural world was an active, malevolent force that could not be easily tamed or understood. The legend served a psychological purpose, transforming the random, tragic, and natural occurrence of animal attacks into a narrative with a clear villain. A story that could be understood and eventually, with the right ritualistic intervention like a silver bullet, defeated. The Beast of Gévaudan remains so compelling because it exists at the precise intersection of fact and folklore, a dark reminder of a time when the shadows at the edge of the village held very real monsters, whether they had 4 legs or simply existed in the terrified minds of those who heard the howl in the night. These phantom vessels, often spotted on the misty horizon or found drifting with sails set and tables laid for a meal that would never be eaten, became powerful symbols of the ocean's capricious and terrifying nature. Sailors' logs from the period are filled with breathless accounts of these encounters, describing ships that would appear from nowhere, sometimes glowing with an eerie phosphorescent light, only to vanish again into a squall. The crews of these ghost ships were never seen, or if they were described as spectral, translucent figures who went about their duties in a silent, mournful pantomime, utterly unaware of the living sailors who watched them in horror. These weren't just stories told to frighten new deckhands. They were recorded as factual events by experienced, hardened mariners who had seen every normal danger the sea could offer. The consistent detail in these accounts suggests they were describing a shared, tangible experience, even if its true cause remained just beyond their understanding. This deep-seated superstition was not mere ignorance. It was a vital, functional part of medieval navigation and survival. In an era without satellites, radar, or even accurate charts, the sea was the ultimate unknown. A sudden bank of fog could hide a deadly reef. A shift in the wind could mean the difference between reaching port and starving at sea, and a strange light in the water could be a warning of shallows or a sign of something far less natural. In this world of immense uncertainty, superstition provided a framework, a way to make sense of the senseless. Attributing a shipwreck to a vengeful mermaid or a lost course to a mischievous spirit was, in its own way, more comforting than accepting the brutal randomness of fate. It created a world where the sea had rules, even if those rules were dictated by capricious supernatural beings. It meant that through the right rituals like blessing the ship or never setting sail on a Friday, a crew could exert some small measure of control over their destiny. The most famous of these legends, the Flying Dutchman, finds its roots in these very medieval fears, though the story would be codified much later. The core tale is always the same. A proud, blasphemous Dutch captain vows to round the Cape of Good Hope even if it takes him until doomsday. For his arrogance, he is cursed to forever sail the oceans, never making port, his ship a spectral harbinger of doom for any vessel that sights it. This story perfectly encapsulates the medieval mariner's worldview. The sea was a place of divine judgment where human hubris could invoke a supernatural punishment that served as an eternal warning to others. The Dutchman's crew, trapped between life and death, represented the sailors' deepest fear, not just drowning but being lost to the sea eternally, denied the peace of a proper Christian burial on land. This was a spiritual terror as potent as any physical danger. Beyond demons and curses, sailors also feared more tangible, yet equally bizarre, oceanic phenomena that they struggled to explain. The glowing, agitated patches of water we now know as bioluminescence caused by algae were often described as the churning passage of a monstrous kraken just beneath the surface. The strange, low-frequency sounds of icebergs calving or whales communicating were interpreted as the mournful songs of sirens luring men to their doom. Perhaps the most dangerous illusion was the Fata Morgana, a complex mirage caused by temperature inversions that can make a distant ship appear to be floating high above the horizon or transform a cliff face into a shimmering fairy castle. For a crew already primed to see the supernatural in every wave, such a sight could be utterly convincing proof that they had sailed right off the edge of the known world and into the realm of magic and monsters. When a ship was found genuinely abandoned, the theories became even more grimly human. The silence of a derelict vessel was a canvas onto which sailors projected their worst fears. Some believed the crew had been taken by pirates from a silent, swift-moving galley, murdered and thrown overboard. Others whispered of mutiny, a disease that drove men mad, or a terrible crime that left the ship cursed and uninhabitable. The very act of boarding such a vessel was considered perilous, as the curse or disease that had claimed its original crew might still linger. Many a salvage crew, tempted by the prospect of claiming an abandoned ship and its cargo, would have boarded with their hearts in their throats, expecting to find ghosts around every corner. These ghost ships were the ultimate maritime mystery, a riddle wrapped in timber and sail, reminding every sailor that the greatest dangers on the ocean were not always the ones you could see coming. Yet the bizarre phenomenon of the dancing plague offers far more than just a historical curiosity. It provides a profound, if unsettling, window into the powerful connection between extreme psychological stress and physical manifestation. Modern psychology views these events through the lens of mass psychogenic illness, a condition where intense emotional distress spreads through a community, expressing itself not through words but through shared physical symptoms. In a world without therapists or a vocabulary for mental health, the body became the canvas upon which collective trauma was painted. The frantic, uncontrollable movements were a somatic scream, a physical expression of the deep-seated fears, anxieties, and hopelessness felt by a population living on the razor's edge of survival. This wasn't a choice, it was a neurological hijacking, a desperate and involuntary release of pressures that had been building for years. The contagion aspect of the mania reveals the incredible power of social influence and shared belief systems. In a tightly knit medieval community, seeing a neighbor or family member gripped by such a powerful compulsion could trigger a powerful empathetic and psychological response in others. This is the domino effect of hysteria, where the suggestion of illness, when paired with a pre-existing state of high anxiety, becomes the illness itself. The shared cultural framework, the belief in Saint Vitus's curse or demonic possession, provided a ready-made script for how this distress should look and behave. People weren't just copying the dancing, they were subconsciously adopting the only available explanation for their own overwhelming feelings of dread and helplessness, their bodies acting out a role that their society had defined for them. This historical pattern finds startlingly relevant parallels in our modern world. Though the symptoms have evolved to match contemporary fears, we may not see outbreaks of compulsive dancing, but we regularly witness cases of mass sociogenic illness. There are documented instances where groups of students, after one person faints or feels nauseous, suddenly develop similar symptoms, leading to school closures and panic, despite no environmental toxin or virus ever being found. These events are often triggered by the same core ingredients: a high-stress environment, a tightly knit social group, and a shared, often unspoken, fear, be it of a chemical attack, a new disease, or social pressure. The human mind, when pushed to its limit, can make the body believe almost anything, and that belief can spread through a crowd with the speed and virulence of a biological pathogen. Ultimately, the dancing plagues of history challenge us to look beyond simple diagnoses and consider the deeper social and emotional ecosystems that make such events possible. They remind us that the line between the mind and the body is far more permeable than we often assume, and that societal pressures can manifest in breathtakingly physical ways. The citizens of Strasbourg weren't possessed by demons, They were possessed by fear of starvation, of disease, of a future they could not control. Their dancing was a tragic, collective cry for help from a world that offered them no other outlet. In understanding their suffering, we gain not just insight into the past, but a crucial lens for examining the strange and often unexplained ways that our own modern anxieties continue to shape and sometimes shatter our shared reality. And so we arrive at our final mystery, one that brings us full circle to a story that began with two lost children emerging from the earth, yet one that continues to baffle linguists and historians to this day. The tale of the Green Children of Woolpit is not complete with their assimilation. Its deepest enigma lies in the language they spoke, a tongue that no one in 12th century England could recognize or decipher. When the villagers first approached the frightened boy and girl, they were met with a stream of sounds that were utterly alien. This was not merely a different accent or a known foreign language like French or Flemish. It was a complete linguistic system, structured and coherent to the children, but pure nonsense to everyone else. This language barrier is the heart of the Woolpit mystery, a puzzle that has inspired centuries of speculation, from grounded historical theories to fantastical claims of parallel worlds. The most historically plausible theory connects the children to the Flemish immigrants who had settled in eastern England. During the reign of King Henry II, these Flemish weavers and merchants were a distinct community, but they also faced violent persecution. Following a political purge, many were killed or forced to flee into the dense, wild forests of Suffolk. If the children were orphans of such a conflict, their unknown language could simply have been Flemish. To the isolated, rural Saxons of Woolpit, the Germanic sounds of Flemish would have been completely unintelligible, sounding as foreign as any language from the moon. Their story of a land of twilight could then be a child's confused memory of a dark, deep forest where they had been hiding, with the loud noise being the clash of battle that orphaned them. This explanation neatly ties the mystery to a documented historical event, providing a sad but logical account of their origin. Yet, the Flemish theory is not without its problems. Would a Flemish child truly have no concept of common foods like bread? And would their skin carry a greenish hue simply from malnutrition? While possible, it feels like an incomplete fit. This has led other researchers down a more fascinating, albeit speculative, path. Could their language have been a remnant of something much older? Before the Norman conquest, England was a tapestry of dialects, from Old English to the Celtic languages of the Britons who had been pushed to the fringes of the island. Some have wondered if the children were descendants of an isolated Celtic community that had preserved an ancient pre-Saxon language, a last echo of a world that had otherwise vanished from the region. Their green coloration could then be linked to Celtic folklore, where the color green is often associated with the otherworld and its mystical inhabitants. The most extraordinary explanation, however, moves beyond history and into the realm of hidden worlds and secret societies. For those who believe the children's account literally, their language is the key evidence that they were not from any known country on the surface of the earth. Their description of St. Martin's Land, a place of perpetual twilight, has been interpreted by some as a description of a vast subterranean world. Proponents of this idea suggest that isolated pockets of an ancient human culture could have survived underground for centuries, developing their own unique language and even a different physiology, their green skin perhaps resulting from a diet rich in certain underground plants or minerals, or from adapting to a different atmosphere. In this light, their language wasn't just foreign. It was a linguistic fossil, completely isolated from the Indo-European language family that dominated the surface world, a living window into a prehistoric past. Modern analysis tends to temper these wondrous ideas with linguistic probability. Creating and maintaining a completely unique language requires intense isolation over thousands of years, a scenario nearly impossible on the populated continent of Europe. Languages evolve through contact. The fact that the girl learned English relatively quickly suggests her native tongue was not impossibly alien, but likely belonged to a known, if distant, language family. Her ability to acquire a new language points to a human mind working with familiar grammatical structures, not something utterly otherworldly. The boy's subsequent depression and death further suggest a profound cultural and physiological shock, more consistent with a sudden transition from an isolated, perhaps impoverished, community to a new world, rather than a journey from a fantastical underground realm. Ultimately, the language of the Green Children remains their most enduring and impenetrable secret. It died with the boy and faded from the girl's memory as she assimilated, leaving behind not a single word for modern linguists to analyze. This absolute loss is what grants the mystery its eternal power. We are left with a choice: to see it as a poignant tale of medieval refugees, a sad footnote in the brutal conflicts of the period, or to embrace the possibility of something truly inexplicable. The Green Children challenge us to sit with that ambiguity, to acknowledge that some doors to the past remain permanently closed, and that history, in its silent corners, still holds onto a few wonders that refuse to be neatly categorized and explained. And so our journey through the corridors of the bizarre and unexplained reaches its end. From the feverish dance of Strasbourg to the silent, green-skinned children of Woolpit, from the indecipherable pages of the Voynich Manuscript to the phantom Beast of Gévaudan, these 30 events stand as powerful testaments to one simple, inescapable truth: history is far stranger than any fiction we could ever hope to invent. These are not mere footnotes or curiosities. They are the pulsating, living proof that our past is a tapestry woven with threads of mystery, wonder, and profound uncertainty. They remind us that the world has always been a place of deep magic and unsettling questions, long before we had the tools or the terminology to even begin answering them. But these mysteries do more than just shock and entertain us. They hold up a mirror to our own nature. Every attempt to explain them, from attributing the dancing plague to a saint's curse to our modern theories of mass psychogenic illness, from seeing the devil's hoof prints in the snow to hypothesizing about escaped zoo animals, reveals the inner workings of the human mind. We are, at our core, pattern-seeking creatures driven by an insatiable need to find meaning, to impose order on chaos, and to comfort ourselves with a story, any story, when faced with the terrifying silence of the unknown. Whether we reach for divine intervention, scientific reasoning, or tales of extraterrestrial visitors, our explanations say just as much about us and our times as they do about the events themselves. This is the true gift of these historical enigmas. They are not puzzles with a single solution to be found in the back of a book. They are open-ended invitations to wonder, to debate, and to keep our sense of curiosity forever alive. They connect us across centuries to the people who first witnessed these events, who stood just as bewildered as we are, trying to make sense of a world that refused to behave according to plan. In that shared state of wonder, we find a common humanity. Now the conversation turns to you. The world is brimming with stories like these, and every corner of history holds its own peculiar secrets. What historical mystery has always captured your imagination? Is there a local legend from your part of the world, an unsolved crime from the annals of history, or an archaeological find that defies all logic that you can't stop thinking about? Share your favorite enigmas in the comments below. Let's build a community of curiosity and see what other incredible stories we can uncover together. If this journey into the weird and wonderful has sparked your imagination, then you're exactly where you belong. This channel is dedicated to unearthing the stories that challenge reality, that bend the mind, and that remind us just how astonishing our world can be. To make sure you don't miss our next adventure into the unknown, tap that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. There are countless more mind-bending stories waiting just around the corner, and we can't wait to share them with you. Until then,